Okay. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another special meeting of the Larkspur City Council. Today is Monday, May 22nd. It's 5:34. We're starting just a couple minutes late. And Allison, could I please get a roll call?
Councilmember Carroll.
Here.
Councilmember Hara.
Here.
Councilmember Way.
Here.
Vice Mayor Candell.
Here.
Mayor Paulson.
I'm here. Thank you. So we'll have a couple of preliminary items before our main, the public hearing item number 4. The next item on the agenda, number 2, is public comment. So of course, tonight is a continuing discussion about rent stabilization. So any topic other than that, if you have a public comment, please step up to the mic and tell us your name. Oh, you know something? Before I do that, I got ahead of myself. Let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you're able to rise, please do so. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, so going back to public comment, if anybody here wants to comment on anything not on the agenda tonight, please step up to the mic. Okay, yeah, please.
Good evening, afternoon. I want to remind everyone here in Larkspur.
Sorry, just one sec. Could you give us your name and where you live? We usually, for public comment, we just, usually want to know.
How much time do I have?
Okay. You've got 2 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. I'll try again.
Okay.
Here in Larkspur, Ross, San Anselmo. Hold on, you guys keep. Is that mandatory?
We're just trying to ask you to say your name and where you're from. That's how people usually start. That's all.
Again, is that mandatory per law? I have to do that.
Yeah, no, go ahead. That's
Okay,
fine.
but you guys keep stopping me when I'm talking.
Okay, go ahead.
Here in Larkspur, San Anselmo, Ross, this area is the most segregated area in California. Per racecounts.com, per studies in California, probably in the nation, this is the most segregated area in California. And my comments are towards you and to the public who are singing civil rights, human rights songs. So when you're singing your human rights and civil rights songs, think about Marin City, 2020, State of California Attorney General came out with his findings of the school district, the first in 50 years, the first school district in 50 years in Marin City segregated. He put a desegregation order in Marin City, the first in California in 50 years for a school district. So for these human rights, civil rights issues you are talking about, think about that. And I have more comments, maybe now or in a minute, regarding your resolutions and your proclamations regarding what you have not done in the city for. I'll come back.
No, you got 30 more seconds. That's just the first. Keep going.
I see you're passing those tonight. In the area, I have not seen flags or any signs regarding support for Black lives in this area. So I will come back to you soon regarding support, flags, banners, Black businesses, what you'll be doing to support those efforts. Thank you. And again, I have 30 more seconds. When you're singing your human rights and civil rights songs, think about kids in Marin City who in 2020, the first in 50 years in California, a desegregation order for Black students just wanting fair education.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Okay. Anyone else have a comment for us tonight? That's not on the agenda. Because we'll have plenty of time for public comment when we get to that. Okay, we'll come back. Allison, anybody in the queue?
I'm looking for any raised hands from our Zoom audience members. There's no public comment.
Okay, last call here. Anybody? Okay, so with that, we'll move on from public comment to the approval of the consent calendar. Tonight, we have 3 items on the consent. Does anybody on the council wish to pull an item for further discussion? Okay, anybody in the audience want to pull an item from the consent calendar for discussion? Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar entirely.
I have to make that motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Carroll,
Yes.
Councilmember Hara,
Yes.
Councilmember Way,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kendall,
Yes.
Mayor Paulson.
Yes, thank you. So that passes unanimously. Okay. I'm sorry,
I comment on that, on those resolutions.
on the consent calendar?
Yeah.
Well, we just passed it, but well, why don't you go ahead and comment? Yeah,
Thank you.
give you 2 minutes.
I see you have 3 that you just passed.
Mhm.
Now, again, as I just said, being in the area. February, it's Black History Month, correct? I imagine you passed something. I don't know what. What display, what did you do to promote Black businesses, Black lives, besides a proclamation? In February coming up, I'm going to come to you and ask, what will you do before that? What are you going to do to support Black businesses? Proclamations are great. All that's fine and dandy. This is the most segregated community in California. Per racecounts.com, the advancement project. I've read it, I've seen it. So I will come before you. I'm before you now. I will come before you in the future to ask you, what will you do as a council, as a city, to promote in the most segregated, not accidentally, area in California and probably in the nation? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So with that, we passed the consent calendar and we'll move on to our public hearing. So that is item 4.1 on the agenda. And we met 2 weeks ago and we're discussing the rental ordinance. So I'm thinking again, just to frame out the evening tonight, we had some discussion which we can recap. There were some questions for staff. I don't know if we want to start with any feedback from the staff. My thoughts are to have a council check-in just to see, if the members want to say anything. We've already done that. That can be very brief. We can go to public comment for, 2 minutes per person and then do our deliberations and see where we are. So with that being said, city manager, is there anything on the staff side? You gave us a staff report and I think Sky, we had a couple legal questions. I don't know if there's anything or we should just wait till the flow of things.
Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure if you want some housekeeping done perhaps before we
Sure.
jump
Yeah, let's
into
do
it.
that.
So perhaps for the benefit of the people in the room and for the
Mhm.
council as a reminder, the council held public hearing 2 weeks ago. You ended that public hearing and did not take action that time and instructed us to notice a new public hearing. So in a sense, you've actually started anew this evening with a public hearing. So you will have to follow the format of a public hearing from start to finish. And I would agree that staff has some abbreviated comments. We don't really need to add much to the written report or the previously provided staff report. I do, if you want to invite it, I have some comments. I think city attorney has a few comments, and then we are available for questions. You'll need to decide how you're going to structure your discussion with the council, opening the public hearing, taking public comment, closing the public hearing. But you need to go through all those motions again.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, we formally open a public hearing, and when we open public comment, we need to leave that open, have the timekeeping and then close it at the end, and then come back to deliberations, and then at the end, close the public hearing.
I would just add to that, the staff report from the previous meeting and from tonight lays out a summary of issues that council discussed, issues that council didn't get to. If you want to continue the discussion of those before you take public comment and then further deliberate afterward, that's fine too, in the context of a new public hearing.
Okay. Got it. So with that, I want to check in with my fellow council members. Last time we tried for the public's benefit to kind of give a better idea of where we are, where public comment might be helpful. We have gotten a lot of public comment, but I'm willing to do that again tonight. And the deliberations, I took some notes here, kind of where we left off. We had gone over cap, and we had gone over maybe 5 different items, and we left several definitions undone, like the remodel and so forth. So we could either jump into where we left off, or just kind of continue down. But my thoughts are first to check in with you. Maybe we can just go down the dais, and any changes. You all had kind of stated where you are last week, but it might be helpful to talk about issues that we did discuss that are kind of lines in the sand or red lines for you, or things that we need to have or see, and I will do the same.
Right.
So do we have a volunteer on this?
Which Kevin?
It doesn't matter. We'll all 5 of us will go.
I'll start because I'll be short and sweet.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I've already articulated my views on the issues that are for us tonight in the last meeting. My mind hasn't changed in any way from the last time we had this discussion. There are some nuances that I think it would be productive for us to discuss at tonight's hearing. But if the question is whether I have something to add beyond what I contributed to the last discussion, the answer is no.
Okay.
We're going down the line.
It's up to you guys.
Kevin's got his hand on it.
Yeah. Good.
All right, well, the other Kevin said short and sweet, so I guess I'm gonna be long and rambling. I haven't changed where I stand on it.
Bring your mic down. I think it would help him.
Okay, you all know where I stand. We've been discussing this for quite some time, and so I don't think rehashing it will serve any purpose. And I see a lot of familiar faces out in the crowd. I don't know how many of you have gone through the joy of reading all 500, and I think, well, we must be closer to 600 pages by now, if you include all the correspondence. So I think where we stand is pretty good, and the quicker we get to the heart of the discussion, the better, I think. Thank you.
That wasn't rambling.
Okay, so you're asking whether our thoughts have changed or new changes or new ideas
Sure.
since the last time we've had this discussion. I obviously appreciate the continued engagement with people. A lot of letters, even ones just deposited right now. So I think we've all been paying attention to all that. I still think this is one of the most challenging economic arguments and personal arguments that have happened in 10 years that I've been sitting in this role, that I still think it's an issue that needs to be decided on by the voters. So I'm seeing what happened in Fairfax, and it's going to the voters there. I think it's going to be an issue that will be important for more than just the very engaged people that are here and paying attention to weigh in on also. So I think it's a very important issue that needs to have multiple opportunities for people to say yes or no from the general public, not just us, the 5 of us or the 3 of us.
First of all, thank you everyone for being here. It's amazing when the community is involved in something as important as this. So thank you. I'm going to start where I left off last time, which is I asked one of our council members to address one of my concerns, and I'll throw it out there, and anybody at public comment, if you want to address it, I would love to hear people's opinion on it. I think everybody here is trying to do what we feel is in the best interest for the community. Well, clearly, if, people are struggling with their rent, everyone wants to help. That's just, human nature. The concern that I have is that my job here is not just to help people today, but to help our community thrive for the next 50 years. And my concern is that from everything that I have read and researched is that one of the unfortunate unintended side effects of rent control is it reduces the supply of housing, either because people stay in their units longer, so they don't, there's not as much turnover, so there's not the supply, or that people take their units off the market, so there's a lower supply. And the end result, even though we're trying to help renters, is it ends up raising the cost of future renters. So it makes it harder for future people to be able to live in Larkspur. And I'm struggling, so like I said, we all want to help people who are struggling with their rent, but we don't want to make our city worse, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. So that's my concern. So if people feel either, and there's two responses, I think, that are legitimate to that. One is, Scott, you're wrong. It doesn't change the supply. I would love to hear if people believe that, and I'd be happy to hear why people believe that. And the other is, it does lower the supply, but it's worth it because we have an emergency right now. We have a situation we have to deal with, and it is worth it to help people right now at the expense of raising costs in the future, which is going to hurt the next round of people trying to live in Larkspur. And maybe that's an argument that it's worth it to help the people now at the expense of future people. And I'd love to, if that's how people heal, I'd love to hear that as well. So that's where I am and kind of what I'm looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I will try to be brief and I don't think I'll succeed. I've been sitting here all afternoon. I got here at about 12 and had to pick up my kid. I'm looking out there and I've talked to a lot of you on the phone, or I've seen in person. I had 4 calls this afternoon. I had several calls yesterday, and I really tried to alternate. Like I would have a call for someone who really advocates for rent control and someone who doesn't advocate, and go back and forth, back and forth. Let me just, kind of read off, because I don't want to ramble. And when you spend so much time, and by the way, this is a cup of coffee. I'm really doing my best to
Rambling is bad.
and rambling is bad, I'm told. So, the first thing I wanted to say, really sincerely is to thank you guys. And it's not just, I know we do that a lot as a cliche, but this is an important issue. And I have, given up work days, and I have really tried to talk to anybody and everybody. I spoke with Leah Simon Weisberg from the Berkeley Rent Board. I talked to Chance Katrana today. I've talked to CAA. I've talked to the realtors. I've talked to Prime. I've talked to a bunch of people, and many of you DSA. And I want to thank you, because I feel like you're giving me an education, and my job here is to try to learn. And many of you are looking at the calculus, the electoral, like, okay, Gabe's the swing vote, and which way is he going to go? But I'm not, and I really pushed for this conversation to happen. It could have been suppressed or just not attended to. And I agendized this and really wanted us to talk about an ordinance so it could be meaningful and, the community could come out. So, I want to thank you guys for all that. And, I have read probably a dozen papers and tried to absorb them and really weigh the issues. I think it is a complex policy issue for, a town of 1,200. It's really a state issue. It's a county issue, but we've been willing to take it on. We think it's important, and, we're going to keep working with this. I kind of am looking at what I've learned, my knowns, and what I know is there's a lot of stories, a lot of narratives, a lot of anecdotes, and I'm trying to get to the bottom of, who we're helping and how we're helping them. So just to run through a couple of numbers, there are about 2,500 units in Larkspur, and that would be, plus or minus 10%. That would be, controllable or put under rent control. And about 50% of those, maybe 1,250, are under 12 units. So, one of the narratives is that we have like Prometheus or BlackRock or, some of the larger players. I've really tried to talk to the smaller landlords and see like, hey, what's going on? How will this impact you? And, again, there's an element of trust, there's an element of skepticism in every conversation, but you really try to, see what is going to happen there. I would say the remaining, so about 50% are small. And then 20 or 30%, I would say, have really deep ties to the community. So we're not like San Francisco. And when I look at a San Francisco study where people, you have investors and people are kind of gaming the system and maximizing profits, I think this ecosystem is a bit different. So that's what I found so far. I think about 1,000 of those units are paying 30 to 40% of their income on rent. That's the estimate that I've, come up with. And again, I'm trying to be, hopefully I'm not too long-winded for you guys, but, this is where when we get to public comment, it's helpful. If I missed a fact, I, got a couple yesterday from Kurt Reese, and I got a couple from, from Romeo, and I'm really, looking to build as much information so we make a good decision here. And I, our own housing element, we have about 500 seniors, and I would say, a fair number of those are at risk. And I've said this several times, one of the reasons I'm up here and thinking about rent control is for fixed income seniors. So, and many of us are, into that aging issue. We know that rent is going to be a third over 60 by 2030. Larkspur is actually from, the voter rolls I've looked at over 50%. So the displacement issue, people, that's really real. And there was a public comment today. It was, I think, Robert Tucker, in the comments, and he was a former policeman here, and he's saying, guys, help me. I can't do 5 or 7 or 8 or whatever percent. So, that's why I'm here. I think that's one of the things we're trying to decide. And, I'm also looking at Skylark as an anomaly, but also a way I can try to project as to what's going on in the whole city. So Skylark has 450 units, and the Skylark Fund has subsidized about 30 of those people. So they have a means tested program, and, there's a big question mark on what means and how you test it, but let's just work with our estimates here. So about 30 out of 450 are people that I would say are the ones that are really struggling and could fall through the safety net. So that to me means that there are about 250 units in the city at risk that I'm worried about. And then I've looked at the range of rent controls. I mean, I hope you guys don't get bored tonight. I know you're fired up. I went to Berkeley. I wanted to get out there with you. I've been in so many protests starting in 1991, but I really want to think through the different angles here because there's a lot of nuance. And I appreciate, I'll call out Kurt and Tristan. We talked again yesterday. Very thoughtful, very intelligent arguments, and I've learned a lot. And it's given me the sense that sometimes rent control is all or nothing. And I'm a moderate by heart. I believe that housing is a number one issue for us. And my toolbox has 3 tools in it. One is affordable housing. That's the big one. One is subsidy, and the other is rent control. And I like to go to the third one last. And I think most papers and everybody agrees that if we were building more Oak Hills and we were doing what Fairfax did, where they bought and put in for $50,000, they've really created housing. And, to your point, sir, yes, diversity, people can move in who can afford it. I think I'm very much for that. And I've been a part of that in the past. That's what I'd like to see. But the problem is it takes time. And I have to call out Councilmember Carroll, too. He's been a really good voice for many. He's like, I'm not a renter, I'm in a mobile home. But I think some of these people just don't have a lot of time. It's paycheck to paycheck. So, I'm trying to be sensitive to the timing element where policy like this is very long term. So let me kind of cut to the chase. I wanted to expose my thinking also because we'll move into public comment, next before we come back to let the staff give us any more facts. But, I want this to be something that's in the heart, but also in the head. Let's, kind of reason this out as much as we can. I think there's a cost of not doing enough. We've had disagreements here. I don't think my position's ever changed, that there's a cost of not doing enough. AB 1482 is the law of California. I don't think it does enough. I'm up here to try to tighten that up. And I think that, all the things I said before about the aging, about diversity, about these are all reasons to do stuff. I do have to say that the signs that were out there make Marin affordable is a little bit misleading to the public. Rent control will not make it affordable. It'll take the housing that you're in. The incumbents will have the benefit of maybe living here longer or for quite a long time, but it's not going to change the fact that we're rent burdened. So, I don't want us to false advertise either. But there's definitely a cost of not doing enough. And, I also have been, want to call out, Councilmember Candell and Way and appreciate their side that there's a cost of doing too much. One of the, discussions I had last night was, there's a pretty well-known paper from San Francisco. It's Rebecca Diamond, and they studied San Francisco. And I've already disclaimed we're not San Francisco. It's not perfect. But essentially, they found that by imposing rent control, they lost about 10 or 15% of their rental housing. So let's go back to our number. We have 2,500 units. We could lose somewhere between 200 and close to 400 units as a consequence. And I just fact checked that by going to the brokers in Fairfax, and there are units that are being sold and pulled off the market as we speak. So it's real. We don't know the exact number, but I don't think anybody disputed to me that's real. And that might be a cost of doing too much. Like, do we go down to 2/3 CPI? Do we do 5? Do we do 7? I think those are the things that are very, very hard for, a council like us and with limited data to decide. So one of my key concerns is that we lose inventory. One of the measures for me is that we look at vacancy rates. The vacancy rate, got as low as 2%. A healthy market, it's 5%. It means if you want to live in Larkspur, you got some chance. 1 in 20 units are open, ready for you to look at, and you can move in. Once you overprotect incumbents, you may really lower vacancy. And if we're protecting the people who are here, which I want to do, and not have displacement, we may also be kind of discriminating against the people who want to come in. And that's a cost, something we can talk about more. Then there's the risk that if we do something here on the dais, then it can come up as an initiative and it can be overturned. It's a risk, that may be worth taking, but that's also happening in Fairfax, and it's something to look at. One of the hard things that we haven't talked about much is, we're up here, my passion, what got me on the city council was, some of the safety net, but it was really public safety. I'm on the fire board. I work with the neighborhood response groups. This town could burn down. We have storm drain problems. We just got through the budget talks last week, and I asked our budget, finance director, can we cut anything? And the answer was, we run a tight ship. We're lean. No. And so for me, if we do a program like this, we have to look at how much it's going to cost. And are we going to suddenly not have money for fire safety? I'm concerned, the police, for me, one of the big issues is a lot of the, traffic issues, people riding e-bikes. I've got a little kid who could get run down. I don't know that I can go to Chief Norton and see if we have anything because we're running such a tight ship. So we have to at least think of the trade-offs. And if it's a very elaborate rent control program, it will cost more. I don't think anyone's disputing that. But please, you can provide me with your thoughts when we get to public comment. So my conclusions, kind of from this, and I've tried to be open-minded, but I know there's a time to be decisive, is that, I came here wanting to improve on AB 1482. The current rent. I think what we learned from COVID is 10% is going to slam people to the curb. That's not good. I want to lower it. The number I put out there was 7%. Is that helpful? Well, if you go the distance between 4 and 7, and that it's sort of splitting in the middle, 2/3 CPI, that would take you to, historically for the last 40 years, inflation's been close to 3, so about 2% a year. And it turns out, I checked in with Fairfax too, that's sort of what landlords have been doing for years and years and years, is kind of going at that rate. And now maybe it'll go up more or not. But anyway, I think we need to come down from 10. Let's just start with that. And then I also feel if you do have to move for no fault of your own, there is a legitimate cause, a no fault eviction, 1 month is not enough. You could be at a below market rent, meaning, you're in a 2-bedroom, which should be renting or could be renting at $3,000, you're paying half that, $1,500. Getting $1,500, where's the moving van? And you're not going to get into another place. So I really want to see that if that does happen, that there are improvements to move out costs. And then I think part of the problem is we're kind of driving in the fog here. And data is hard to come by, but we don't really have any kind of rental registry. And I've gotten, some honest pushback, from, different stakeholders here, but I've, kind of held to the fact that I would make better decisions if I had more numbers. So sorry for all the words. I hope it's helpful, but in short, option one, I think as a council, my vote would go towards improving 1482 to a point. Option two is I respect the fact that maybe it needs to be tight. I think I told, Kurt and Tristan yesterday, it reminds me of being a roofer. You don't come to a house and say, I'm going to build you a 75% roof. I mean, if it's going to rain, you need a roof or you don't have a roof. And so I think when I look at some of the rebuttals to, what went wrong in San Francisco, it's because we didn't put a 5-year on the right of return. We didn't close Ellis loopholes. We didn't get rid of vacancy decontrol. Those are things I don't feel as a council member, I'm not prepared to do. I think I understand the economics well enough to see that those risks go up and everything that's risky gets riskier. So option two for me is to put this on the ballot in a meaningful way. That means the city can either put this on in November, or we could put it on in March, November 2023 or March of 2024, and we'd form a drafting committee, and we could draft it, to stricter standards. And then really, those of you who are in here and you're passionate, I appreciate your passion, but I hope we're democratic enough to say that if this is really a community-wide issue, we have 55% renters here. If this is really what the community wants, then it would pass, and we should take that risk. So I feel option one and option two are where I've landed with many, many weeks of thinking and listening, and those are my kind of check-in comments, and appreciate you giving me many, many more than 2 minutes to talk. You could have cut me off earlier. So with that, I want to, it sounds like Kevin, you had something you wanted to say.
No, I just wanted to. Sorry, I just wanted to point out for the record that the mayor ignored my earlier advice about
Long-windedness.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I hope it's worth it.
But that's all very helpful. Just from my own personal view, I do not think it is appropriate for us as a council to be voting to put this on the ballot. If the public wishes to initiate a ballot initiative to address this issue in its own right, that's fine. I personally view the council encouraging that approach to be basically punting. I would very strongly encourage the council to take this issue seriously, address it head on, and take action tonight.
Okay, noted. I mean, I'll just say that we are taking the issue seriously, and I think, I wouldn't call it punting to say that there's a threshold where, there are good reasons for us to try to get the entire community to have input.
I apologize if I used an inappropriate semantic expression.
No, not at all. So with that, maybe we can just have some staff clarifications if there's anything. Otherwise, if the council has any more to say, I didn't want to hog the conversation, but I kind of, reading the room and the dynamic we have up here on the dais, I thought it'd be appropriate to, tell you that I'm listening. I'm trying to be as open as I can. I really want to listen to public comment, even though I think I've already logged several hundred, and I reread these comments, but things matter, and I'm here to listen. So do we have anything, city manager,
Can
or?
I just ask you just one
Yeah.
thing? A number one option you said was improving 1482 to a point. What do you mean by that?
Well, and that's where we have 5 people up here. So I'm, checking in a little more thoroughly than I did last time. I felt comfortable with the 3 items that I stated. I know that's not every detail. There's probably 10 light items in the ordinance, but I don't want to go to a 5 2/3 CPI cap up here. I don't feel comfortable with that. And I do think we can still improve upon it. And I failed to mention, option one is not mutually exclusive with option two. We can put in something now, and then you can still take it to the voters. And that way you've made a culture shift. Larkspur does not I mean, Marin, you guys, take this to San Anselmo, take this to, it's going to be very hard to get traction. We seem to be the ones who are on the fence, but this is really a countywide issue. And I've been wanting to raise this with the MCCMC, and I've been talking to the supervisors, but my point is I believe that we need to do some kind of protection. What we had before was not enough. And there's a lot of, you're going to see costs go up and consensus go down as you go towards strictness. So that means, why don't we do option 1, and then you can draft option 2 and put it on the ballot and see what the voters think. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, I just don't know how that would, maybe the staff can kind of talk about how that would work. Is that?
Well, I think there's 2 exercises before the council. One is to resolve some policy direction. And by direction, I don't mean tell us what to do. I think as a group, you need to decide where we're going. And I think a lot of what the mayor's talking about is at that point. Then we have to pivot, once you've done that, to the specifics of what the language is going to say. So staff's provided you with some framework to try to do that. As a reminder, the staff recommendation is essentially very similar to the framework used in the city of Oxnard, which it takes the Tenant Protection Act as its basis and then provides local provisions within that framework. At the last meeting, you had a lot of discussion of some other ordinances. So we provided you with the Bell Gardens ordinance. They actually only did one ordinance with both rent stabilization and eviction protection combined. And then we provided you with the ones that were adopted in Fairfax. Throughout the 600 pages that Councilmember Carroll referenced, I think we've probably in total given you selections from about 8 or 9 ordinances. But of course, I think talking to all of you, you've probably all, like me, read a couple dozen more in some capacity. They all have basic tenets, and you're still struggling as a group to agree on the basic tenets. One, are you going to do this? And then secondly, what are those specific things that we've tried to highlight and say, if you can get over the hump on these key points, we think we can get you the finish line in terms of what the rest of the ordinance needs to say. At its core, there's only 3 or 4 high-level policy decisions. A lot of the remainder of these ordinances, whichever flavor you pick, is about the way these things are administered, which we can get into that discussion as a secondary matter once you've resolved this sort of primary concern of what are we doing and how are we doing at that top level. In the staff report, we essentially tried to go back. I want to thank the city attorney. He provided me his notes. I took my notes and went back on the video. Tried to just highlight areas from the last conversation where there was some consensus. If you don't see anything in the staff report, we didn't see consensus. We still saw a lot of debate going on among the council. So we didn't want to suggest that you had coalesced around anything. Or in a couple of cases here, there were 1 or 2 examples that were repeated a number of times. So we wanted you to have that in your record, that we had heard you talk about specific things several times. So at some point, the council needs to decide if you're going to advance ordinances. As I've heard alluded to, you have 2 ways to do that. You can do that here in this chamber, or you can do that by placing something on the ballot. If you place something on the ballot, there's still an exercise to go through, which is what exactly are you putting on the ballot? What are the ordinances that would actually go on the ballot? That you are in a sense buying yourself some time to resolve that, but you'd be facing deadlines if you elect to go down that path. And we can talk about that if the council's so inclined. But if you're going to do this and you decide that, you need to get into these core issues of what does the rent cap look like? And the cap is the number that sets the ceiling under which a landlord may raise rent without regulatory constraint. The cap reflects the need to come apply to the city to exceed the cap. And then a lot of the ordinance is the administrative procedure, what happens when that application is made. And that's probably the biggest hurdle that the council has been struggling with on the rent stabilization side. There are some other questions in the staff report. But that's the big one. We've also provided you with some framework to talk about eviction protections. I do want to make a recommendation to the council, which is maybe stick to one topic when you're having your deliberations before doing the other, because I think what's happened is you haven't been able to resolve, so you've moved on. And I think you may want to bifurcate your conversation a little bit in order to advance it to the finish line. The two things can be talked about in concert. I just think in terms of hitting some of these key points we've highlighted for you, it might be helpful to try to nail down one to completion before moving on, but we'll go wherever you want to take the conversation. And then I'm going to offer the city attorney if he has any comments, and then turn it back to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks. In the grand scheme, this is pretty minor, but I did want to elaborate on an answer that I gave to a question from Councilmember Candell regarding termination of leases at the end of the lease term. I had forgotten that the Tenant Protection Act indirectly, by implementing a just cause framework, indirectly now, if a unit is subject to the Tenant Protection Act's just cause protections, that the end of the lease term is not a basis for the termination of the tenancy, if that makes sense. But there are a number of caveats to that, and I just want to go through quickly a few of them just so that you understand more fully how complicated this is. And then additionally, for units that are not subject to the Tenant Protection Act's just cause protections, what I said at the last meeting is actually still correct. So the first thing to understand is that that even if a unit is protected by just cause under the Tenant Protection Act, if the property owner makes a written request or demand to execute a written extension or renewal of a lease for an additional term of similar duration with similar provisions, and the tenant refuses, that's actually considered an at-fault basis for termination of the tenancy at the end of the lease term. So it's important to understand that first carve out. The other is sort of this list that we keep coming back to, and that's in the staff report, of exemptions from just cause protections and the rent cap. The lists are a little bit different, but for the just cause protections, units that are exempt from those include housing that received a certificate of occupancy within the last 15 years. So that's the same as with the rent cap, and an important one. Tenant has to have occupied the unit for at least 12 months. Doesn't apply to affordable housing where there's a deed restriction or a regulatory agreement. Doesn't apply to single family owner occupied residences where the owner is renting no more than 2 units or bedrooms. Doesn't apply to a duplex if one of the units is owner occupied and was occupied at the beginning of the tenancy. Doesn't apply to single family homes and condos as long as the owner isn't a REIT, corporation, or LLC in which a member is a corporation. And doesn't apply to housing accommodations in which the tenant shares bathroom or kitchen facilities with the owner who maintains their principal residence at the residential property. So there's a few more, but you get a sense that the just cause protections in the Tenant Protection Act actually do shift that framework of being able to evict the tenant at the end of lease term, but it's a complicated framework and there are a number of carve outs to it. And I just wanted to make sure that I had addressed that before you move on to your public comments and continue with your deliberation.
That was hanging over from last week. Councilmember Kendall.
I just have one more thing I wanted to add. For public comment, I had mentioned kind of what I was looking to, my concerns and what I was looking to hear. What I also just want to throw out there is from the other side, for people who are against rent control, whether they're property owners or whatever their reason for being against rent control. My question I would love answered on that side is, if there were a moderate rent control, something like what the mayor is proposing, 4 to 5%, capped at 7%, 4 or 5% plus CPI, you can apply if there's a reason you need to go over that. Why would that be a bad thing? Because my understanding is most people don't raise the rent more than that anyway. So if you're not an unscrupulous landlord just trying to, maximize profits, why would that be a bad thing from the landlord perspective? So I would love to hear that as well. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Scott. So I wanted to, see if any other council member has something to say, just a couple more framing thoughts and then go to public comment. You know, we have a pretty spirited group here tonight and I see some young children and my two go to bed at 7. So I don't want to make anyone stay up 36:15. Any other council member have anything to say right now? Okay, I just wanted to, clarify, because again, I think most of you realize that, the head on, take it seriously thing. I mean, there's just so much technical stuff here. And, at the end, we're trying to be helpful and, benefit the community. So option 1 that I was discussing is something that Oakland did. And option 2, to repeat, that's, deciding it on the council level. And then option 2 is something that Berkeley did. So, Leah Simon Weisberg, for example, is scrambling because they have to keep putting stuff on the ballot. So the reason I tried to shape things this way is because if we have, I almost think this is, I like using pictures in my hands when it gets too complicated. We have AB 1482, and I feel like we could tighten it up from the council. And if we say 7's not good enough, and I feel like once the data comes in, once things happen, we can work from that. It's a place where I think the unintended consequences are minimized. Some may disagree. They'll say, look, we displaced people, you screwed up. The other way is to kind of come, from the bottom and say, we do 2/3 CPI, 5%, no right, the right of return, 5 years, et cetera. And it's really hard to roll that back, in my opinion. Again, that's something I want to, hear from in public comment. And the advantage of doing it at the council is we don't have to go back to the voter or wait 2 to 4 years. If we do go to the polls, the value is, this is the mandate from the community, and we're only sitting up here because of the mandate from the community. And so that's kind of how we honor that and why we think that's a good option too. And again, I'm trying to set it up so that both could happen and there could be a balance and, this doesn't tear the community apart. With that being said, I am very open. I think, we've heard that there's, other, like Scott wants to kind of get some questions answered. And so if we can start public comment, tonight's 2 minutes, the same deal. At 30 seconds, you'll hear a sort of obnoxious buzz. It's just to remind you. And then, at 2 minutes, please just try to sharpen your comments. It'll actually help everybody in the room. We understand there's a lot of passion, but try to help us see what we're not seeing, with some good examples or some data we're missing or anything. So we can start with public comment. Anybody wants to come up to the mic? Let's get going. And again, if you can tell us your name, before we didn't mean to put you off, but it just helps us, like where you live. A lot of people come in and they're from Kentfield or somewhere else. Doesn't matter. A good point is a good point, but we do have to, attend to our community members and weigh that as well. So go ahead.
First, I want to thank you for the opportunity to express my thoughts on this subject. My name is Matthew Caesar. I've been a resident of Larkspur for over 60 years and have been part of the rental housing business in Larkspur for 30 years. I live in my building and my customers, my tenants, are my neighbors. I also have 30 years of experience managing a rent-controlled building in San Francisco. And I can tell you from that experience that rent control is a bad idea for Larkspur. I'm very sympathetic toward our fellow long-term residents who are struggling to keep up with changing real estate values. It's my firm belief, though, that we should approach that problem with rational compassion rather than an antipathy toward the owners of a particular type of real estate. After all types of residential real estate have appreciated in recent years. I don't want that to take Larkspur down a destructive path of imposing government price controls on the entire industry. Some ways of assisting those who are struggling are better than others. Targeting direct assistance provided in accordance with community values is an equitable solution for all stakeholders. On the other hand, price controls on the entire industry covering all tenants is unfair and does long-term damage to the industry and the community in which it operates. I'm going to skip over some things. I hope it doesn't get too disjointed, but I don't want to take too much time. I find it interesting and telling that one of the strongest proponents of rent control in Larkspur is the Democratic Socialist Party of America, an outside organization from Berkeley. They're not members of our community. They have no roots here, and let alone the deep roots that many of us share. It seems they're pushing government price controls as a matter of ideology. They certainly are not concerned with the long-term health of Larkspur's housing market, a market which is very important to the actual residents of Larkspur. The housing market here has been a dynamic and vibrant one for well over 100 years. And look around, this is a beautiful community, in large part because of how vibrant and dynamic that market has been. Discussion of rent control and tenant protections are.
Sorry, Matthew, that's all you got, but
Is that it?
yeah, thanks for your time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, next speaker. And please, yeah, I've said this earlier, guys, if we can not have applause, I think it's respectful. I mean, I agree and disagree with a lot of stuff, and please don't even give me, and don't boo me, don't applaud me, please. Just keep it neutral. Hi, what are your names?
For having us. My name's Elizabeth. I live and work in Greenbrae and I go to school here in Marin County.
My name's Barrett. I'm a junior at Redwood High School and I've lived in the Larkspur area my whole life.
Okay, sorry, I didn't start you guys, but I don't have to give you 4 minutes or 2 minutes, but go ahead, just keep going.
Good. So as students and young people here in Larkspur, we've witnessed the difficulties of securing an affordable housing situation that's sustainable for the long term.
Because as passionate as we are about protecting the housing provisions that already exist for Marin seniors today, we seek even more so to maintain those standards for the future.
In a town and county where affordable housing is already scarce, not enshrining rent control now sends a message that it is not and will continue to not be a priority in Larkspur.
We sincerely hope that this is not the case. We hope Larkspur can continue to support low-income citizens and seniors for years to come through rent increases that scale reasonably with income and inflation.
And from what Skylark residents have experienced over the last year, 10% is not practical and 7% is not realistic.
I encourage you to stand with these renters as so many Larkspur and Marin teenagers have, because although this is an issue we bring to you today, rent control has the positive power to define the county we inherit tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
Well said. Thank you, guys. All right, next speaker.
All right, good evening, council. I'm Kristen. You guys know me by now. I will point you to the letter submitted by Kurt and Joki for the full position. I wanted to take my time to answer Mr. Candel's question. I share Councilmember Harrow's skepticism of the data. I think there are a lot of other things that affect the supply, and I think it's kind of short-sighted to place that on rent control. But even if that's wrong, and it does affect that, I do think it is worth the risk. Everyone knows that housing is expensive. It now costs, the average house in Marin costs 30 times the average salary. And the people who will feel that first are renters. The opposition is correct to point out that supply is the problem. Supply takes a long time to build. I don't think many of the renters here will survive at the current rental rates, the current market rate, which is kind of independent of what a house is actually worth in terms of the amenities offered. I don't think a lot of people here will survive long enough for a supply to be a real solution to this. So I encourage the council to take action. If the data at the end of the day points to the fact that maybe we went too far, you can readdress that and go back to it. And I'd also like to state that in the absence of solid data, anecdotes are pretty good. So thank you.
Thank you, Tristan. All right. Next speaker, please. Yep, come on up.
Good evening, everybody. I see a lot of my friends, tenants over at Skylarks, which we live in an experience there that is toxic. I don't know if any of you have ever been there lately. We're looking at something that is called asbestos. And the group of Prime has unfortunately handled it in the wrong way. You take the elevator and there's many particles going on in the air. And it makes me very emotional and very angry to the fact that they are willing to do nothing. They don't care about human life for that matter. There is seniors, there's children, there's pets, but they just sit in their office. And every time I go tell them something, hey, look, they're stealing our bicycles. What you guys are willing to do? Nothing. They go and steal vehicles in the parking lot. And I go tell them and they say, they do nothing. So what's the objective of trying to pass and coming to talk to you for 9 months here when you do have the power to change this? You have the power. I don't know what the wishy-washy part is. It is human life. It is tragedy. If we don't look at it that way, we are failing our town. We are failing our people. And I don't think that you can go home and think that you have failed. Thank you.
You got 30 seconds if you want to keep
And
going.
I really appreciate if you really give us a huge thought and send your inspectors to the place of crime where people are literally living under conditions that are not acceptable. If you work on a building that has asbestos, you must remove the human beings out of there. You fix the place and then you can bring people back. So please send your inspectors. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your comment. Okay. Next speaker, please.
Hi, council members. First of all, I want to thank you for, my name's Jerome Burnell. I have the Blue Rock Larkwood Apartments in the post office. I want to thank you all for this difficult process. And I know you spent a lot of time and it's agonizing. I can only sympathize for you. But I'm here to address the proposal for amendment 05 and 06 on reasonable rate return and a petition for rent increases. First of all, I don't think that it's fair that one person, the town manager, to have the autocratic power to determine what is a fair rate of return for someone's property and whether it's legal. The fact that if a landlord doesn't agree, they have to provide an independent financial report with verified data with all the other costs of materials, labor, permit fees, construction interest, and any other items the manager deems appropriate. This is an accounting nightmare. The fact that he has sole authority to hire anyone he chooses and that these costs will be solely responsible to the landlord. In other words, make it so difficult and costly to discourage any petition, of which there's only one sole authority. But I would like to ask the town manager how you put a fair value on dealing with the water that is coming through the ceiling at 3 a.m., mediating a domestic violence dispute, when you find someone dead in one of their units, or last year when I was helping my manager move a refrigerator up a flight of stairs, I came off the dolly and landed on top of me, severed my Achilles tendon, required knee replacement, surgery, and shoulder surgery. What, in your expert opinion, is a reasonable rate of return on that? I'm going to try to make this fast. The fee program is solely the cost of the landlords. Landlords will incorporate these into any further rents and the risk of limited returns on that. There were not rental problems before in Larkspur, but because of actions by one outlier, the rest of us will be suffering and increased rents, and they will increase rents already.
Thanks, Drew.
Okay. You've heard me say about what my opinion is about that.
No, thank you. Thank you for that. I wish we had more time, but yeah, if you guys can. And I just wanted to say one thing, some of the comments, Jerome, and I'm sorry, the gentleman who spoke about asbestos, if you give me your name, I usually refer back to you. That's one of the reasons, but a little bit later, we may ask for some clarification if that's necessary, but appreciate the comment. Next comment, please. Yeah, just come on up.
Jacqueline Harris. I live at Woodlark.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you all. So sometimes you talk about rent control and sometimes people talk about rent stabilization, especially the lawyers seem to be for instance, rent stabilization. And I thought that the whole thing we were trying to figure out was rent stabilization. And the people that are really against it call it rent control. And that there would be this really adverse effect on the housing market if there was rent control and people just could stay forever and then pass it on to their cousins, and it would just be so disadvantageous to the owners of buildings. So it seems a specious argument to keep calling it rent control when I don't think that's what people that are renters are necessarily asking for. And you mentioned something about senior caps for seniors, and I never thought of that as rent control. I just thought of that as a way to let people, whether at the very low income or at senior levels where their incomes are fixed, have some kind of security for 5 years, 10 years, which is what I brought up last time. It doesn't have to be forever. And we will pass. And then those apartments the rent can be raised again. whether we move or we literally die. So let's make a real description, a real accurate description of what we're talking about and not get ourselves boxed in by the word rent control.
Okay, thank you, Jacqueline. All right, next speaker, please.
How you guys doing? My name is Michael Edwards. I live in the Bon Air apartments with my family.
Hey, Michael.
And my kids, grandparents as well. And I want to tell you, I thank all of you guys right now for the hard work you're doing. I'm going to start off with a small joke. Dave Chappelle, he said, you know, some of you think I grew up in the hood. Not true. My parents made just enough money to make me grow up poor amongst rich people. And that's what I bring to you guys now. I'm a small business owner. I'm also an engineer. I moved my family here after actually meeting the love of my life in the Bon Air shopping center. She's 40 and she lived here her entire life. Her parents lived here. They're in their 70s. We now have 2 apartments next to each other in the Bon Air apartments, number 2 and number 4 in 61 Via Belardo. But there is a problem. The cost for me to live here is incredibly high. Childcare cost me $2,000 per kid, just so that they could go to school someplace safe until they were old enough to be at Basich. I'm spending over $8,000 just to live in a rented environment, and that will not be possible in this next year or the year after, because again, the rent is going to go up for my grandparents. The rent is going to go up for us. You mentioned something about the people coming forward after that. So we have 3 generations happening. We have the past, we have the present, which is me and my partner, and my kids. They're the people that you're going to be making this policy for. And I'm hoping that they're going to be able to grow up in this community because I love it. I enjoy it. Many of my neighbors, they couldn't be here, and I know the time is about to expire because my neighbors, they work at Molly Stone's. They work at the gas station. They go have 2 or 3 jobs. They're nannies. They take care of and support the people around. They're not going to be able to be here to be the critical infrastructure of the stores and the supermarkets and the Walmarts, the jobs that people don't want to do around here. They're the ones that give you the coffee. They're the ones that give you the clothes.
Mike, I hate cutting you off. I wish you could come for a coffee and we talk some more. I feel like we should have more conversation. Yeah, yeah. And by the way, I'm here tomorrow at 2:30 for office hours, so I would love to talk more. Yeah, thanks for that. And the details are very helpful. What's that? Yeah, sure. Just put it. Well, actually, if you can give it to city manager, I think there's a protocol here. I don't know what it is. It's like a salad bar. You can't put your hand by the plexiglass. Okay. No, Michael, thank you so much. Next comment, please. Oh, come on, there's got to be more people.
Hi, Joan Weinberg.
Hey, Joan.
From Skylark. So the way I see this, after all of your talking and comments, some of you were trying to, or all of you were trying to balance acknowledged benefits for tenants versus perceived unintended consequences or loss of housing stock over time. But you don't know if that will happen until you put in a rental cap or stabilization at a reasonable amount so people can stay. What's wrong with people staying instead of everybody having to move out to get more people? So if you adopt a strong policy now that you know will make a difference for the renters now, if after a few years, the rental registry, which you're planning on, shows that units are being lost, then make changes to the law. But there's no point adopting a policy that doesn't actually help renters stay in their apartments, in their rental units. Thank you.
Great, thank you, John. Okay, next speaker, please.
I'm I'm Gail Connolly. I live on Riviera Circle and I've been there for about 45 years. I would first like to say, we elected you, those of us who live in Larkspur. And I really hate to see people coming in from other districts trying to put pressure on our elected officials. You represent us, not the people from East Bay or wherever. So please keep that in mind. One thing that this whole topic has created is a lot of hostility toward landlords. This did not exist prior to this issue being raised. Most of the landlords I know have been very fair with their rents. We've had one property that has been increased substantially, and that's Skylark. Why not just deal with Skylark? Why bring the whole community in, all around us? The other thing is, if we're trying to help people who are under stress financially, why not just help those people? Why put restrictions on everyone? Those of us who don't even need rent control and help. You're going to help us, but we don't need it. The idea is to build up a base of people who need help and help them.
You got 30 seconds. It's just the first obnoxious buzz.
Well, the other thing is, why don't we just let that 1482 run? See what happens with it. It's probably going to do a good job. Why do we have to tinker with it? And with unintended consequences possibly happening. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Gail. Okay, please no applause. Next speaker, please.
Hello again.
Hey.
I'm Richard from Larkspur. I think that rent and eviction protections are as much a moral issue as a numbers issue, as a finance issue. And it's affecting people who live here now, not people in the future. If you have a good crystal ball, you can tell me some details about that, I'll buy it from you. But right now, we really don't know what's going to happen in the future. We've heard of unintended consequences of rent control, rent stabilization. But what about unintended consequences of not having rent and eviction protections for the vulnerable communities, like our loss of diversity, loss of seniors, loss of moderate income families, loss to young people of their grandparents who live close by, loss of essential workers like nurses, teachers, police, loss to schools of students and families who have to move, loss to students whose lives will also be affected by unwanted move. Please think of the people who live here now, who need your help now, and not the people in a theoretical future. I'm personally against putting this vote to the ballot because it won't be a level playing field. It'll be
Richard.
deep pockets versus the renters.
Richard, one more sentence here. We got to finish up. So yeah, actually we're done. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thanks for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Yeah, and by the way, I hate cutting you guys off. Just try to use the clock. Makes my job easier. Who else? We've got the public as well. We can maybe go on Zoom and then come back to the room if people want to decide if they want to speak. So Allison, do we have anybody on Zoom?
Yes, I'm looking for raised hands from our Zoom audience members, and the first comment will come from Johnson Reynolds.
Okay.
Yes.
Johnson, welcome, Johnson.
You hear me? Yeah, I don't live in Larkspur. I live in Marin County. I tried to find a place, a condominium many years ago, and I couldn't find a place. Lanham Village was one possibility. The rooms were too small. Finally ended up living in the canal because I could afford it. And I'm part of MOC. I'm part of Marin Environmental Housing Coalition, and they're very concerned about preserving rental housing for people who need it, essential workers, that have to travel from other parts of the Bay Area to come to Marin County. And we need to preserve this housing. And I've heard back last year, people really express their concern. They're going to have to go out of their apartments because the rents are too high. That's when I'm really relating to. I have a heart for those people. I know that landlords need to have a fair return. They need to have return so they can improve their housing and make it better, and maybe rehab it at some point with no fault eviction, possibly. That's a second part of this thing. But I do agree with Cantwell, whatever his name was, who talked about, 5% plus CPI, 2/3 CPI, 7%. I think we need to say yes to that. And then the follow-up would be if it needs to go higher than that, then of course the landlords could have a chance to do that. Mandatory mediation and the appeals board, that would be the other possibility. But most of the people wouldn't go above 7% anyway. So I really want you to, right now, we need to, this thing for the people and who have been challenged to live in their places and make it a voter later. But I think I agree with that we need to make a decision, because people can't wait for a year or more years to be out of their houses.
Thank you, Johnson. Thank you for your comment. Okay, next speaker, please.
Next speaker will be Eva.
Welcome, Eva.
And Eva, I'll ask you to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'll start your time again. Go ahead, Eva. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm on my bike commute. And I'm about to go over the Richmond San Rafael Bridge, and I want to remind your audience that an awful lot of the essential workers that you need in Marin County have to commute. And that's because you don't have housing that's affordable. And because a lot of business owners in Marin County, when they're not wage thefting their employees, keep their wages at an extremely low rate. I took care of a lot of unhoused patients at UCSF, and 20 years ago, I was making about $20 an hour doing that. That's more than elder care workers get in Marin County at some of these very expensive facilities. So I'm stunned by the statements of the landlords. I think the statements you heard from the landlords were brilliant in some ways. They were brilliant arguments for Maoism. I mean, these people are their own worst enemies. They seem to be completely oblivious to the crisis that's facing not only young people and younger families, but a lot of their own age group peers. I can't tell you how many baby boomers I've had to care for who are unhoused. And it's criminal. I've seen kids I went to school with in Marin County. I've seen them languish, and then some of them actually died on the streets of Marin County simply because they lacked housing. To hear these arguments from these landlords about, scary rent control, it's obscene. What they're doing is hoarding property when people are dying, and you never want to be in that situation. We should never be in that situation in this country. I'll tell you why.
Ava, that's your time, but thank you so much. Sorry, we only have 2 minutes. Next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Vivian.
Welcome, Vivian.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Please adopt a rental cap of 60% of CPI or 5%, whichever is lower. The cap proposed at the last meeting of 5% plus CPI or no greater than 7% is too high. People don't get a 7% increase in income each year. The housing security that rent stabilization provides should be extended to all tenants eligible under state law. Please adopt a right of return that lasts at least 5 years. This is particularly important for Ellis Act evictions, which we know are routinely exploited by landlords and speculators to circumvent rent control. Please adopt relocation payments equal to at least 4 months' rent at fair market value. No fault evictions due to owner move-ins should be severely restricted, if not prohibited, for the elderly, disabled, or terminally ill, as well as students and teachers during the school year. Tenants who are elderly, disabled, or terminally ill should also receive additional relocation payments of $3,000 per household to cope with the enhanced hardship they will face if subjected to a no-fault eviction. The City Council has been discussing rent stabilization for 9 months. Some landlords may be preemptively raising rents to get ahead of the new ordinance. Rents should be rolled back to whatever they were on August 3rd, 2022, when rent stabilization was first put on the agenda for the City Council meeting, plus the annual lawful increase under the new ordinance. And I want to thank you for hearing me. And I live at Skylark.
Thank you, Vivian. Okay, next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Aaron Reuter.
So, welcome, Aaron.
Thank you, Council. I just wanted to bring up a couple salient points here regarding this issue. Twice in the last 5 years, the citizens of California, and by the fact, the citizens of the town of Larkspur have had an opportunity to repeal Costa-Hawkins and implement rent control. The first one was in 2018, Proposition 10, and that was defeated by a vote of around 53.4% of the residents of Larkspur voted against repealing Costa-Hawkins. Again, in 2022, via Proposition 21, the citizens of Larkspur had an opportunity to repeal Costa-Hawkins and implement rent control. That was also defeated within the city or the town of Larkspur by 53.8%. So 2 opportunities come up in the last 5 years, and both times overwhelmingly, the voters of Larkspur have defeated this issue. We have 1482, a statewide law which caps rent at 8% and provides a whole host of no-fault eviction protections. Spend time on this. It's kind of a waste of everyone's time and resources. If you guys are talking about implementing a cap of 7%, you're going to have to hire staff. You're going to have to hire more people, more time to administer this thing. It's going to take resources away from actually targeting people that we want to keep in the community. If you're going to impose any sort of rent control, let's really focus on who it's intended to and those people that need it. Let's means test this and not do a blanket rent control across a whole slew of property types. It doesn't work. If you look at other cities with rent control, some of the highest rents in our nation, San Francisco, Berkeley. I mean, Mayor, you went to Berkeley. I don't know if you want to share how you found the housing in Berkeley when you were there, but I know that it wasn't good and it's also very expensive. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you, Aaron. Next comment, please.
Next speaker is Mary Beth Pascal.
Welcome, Mary Beth.
Hi. Yeah, this is, I just don't understand who they think is going to live in these high rent apartments. Going up 10% and 10%. People don't need to live in Marin County anymore. People are telecommuting. They can live any place. My daughter works out of state. She goes to Colorado. She goes to Hawaii. She doesn't have to live here. And she would not, people that have the money to pay rents like that wouldn't be paying rent. They would be buying homes. So I'm not sure who they think. There's not going to be an exodus of people that want to flood Marin and pay high rents. So I don't know who that is. I don't think current landlords raise their rents 10% because that have a very high turnover. It wouldn't be worth anybody's while. Prime is the one that's created the problem here. You know, if it wasn't for Prime, we would just be going on. Nobody's saying landlords can't raise rents. You know, that's okay. You just don't go crazy. And Prime has never once said that they're not going to do it again and again and again. So Marin and Larkspur is not just for the wealthy. I'm middle class. I consider myself middle class and I should be able to live here and I should not be considered somebody that needs assistance. I work full time and I've lived here for 40 years. So I just don't understand, you know, who they think is going to live here. Have nothing else.
Thank
to
you.
say right
Thank you,
now.
Mary Beth. Yep, no, thanks for your comment. Okay, who do we have next?
Next speaker is Kathleen Baylor.
Okay, welcome,
there.
Kathleen.
Hi, thank you. Just a couple of points. I'm concerned if it's taken to the.
I think we lost you, Kathleen, and I didn't start the timer, so maybe we can both do this together. Are you there? Are you on mute? Okay, if we lost Kathleen, maybe we can come back to her. Let's give her a few seconds here.
Hello?
Oh, hey, you're back.
Oh, thank you. Sorry.
Yep, go ahead. I'll start the time.
Cell phone service. Okay. Thank you for hearing me. I'm just a couple of points. I'm concerned that if it does go to the voters, and I like to vote, I vote all the time, but I'm just concerned it might be an unlevel playing field. I just feel like it's just going to get lost in the wash of things. So that's one. The other thing about worrying about the future people that will come here, and I understand that your concern. However, they have a choice whether they can and want to come here. I don't have a choice. My job is here. I'm a professional opera singer with the San Francisco Opera. I can't just up and go and say, hey, pay me what I make in San Francisco in another company. I'm here. I love it here. I contribute to this society. So I don't really have a choice. I can't just up and leave. I don't have anywhere to go. I've got kids here in schools. And so that's the thing about the future tenants. You know, they have a choice whether they come. I'm kind of here now. I've got all my roots here. And yeah, I just feel we need to look out for each other. I would love to buy a home someday. I'm almost 55. I hope it happens. But for now, I just want to be able to maintain where I'm at now and enjoy the beauty of this community and the people in it, because there's people from all socioeconomic levels that I associate with, and I have good friends everywhere, and I just want to be here. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Kathleen. Next comment, please.
Next speaker is PJ Pfeffer.
Welcome, TJ.
Hi, thanks. PJ Pfeffer, homeowner
PJ.
in Fairfax. Yeah, just speaking on my own behalf, wanted to address a few things, by a more detailed written comment. First, on the assumption that rent stabilization reduces housing, there just isn't evidence of this. We have jurisdictions across California, across the country that have had rent stabilization and just cause eviction. We're not seeing studies that show that it really does reduce supply. That it's hard to argue against the lack of studies. The one you see mentioned most often, which is the one the mayor mentioned earlier, the Diamond study, which measured just multifamily units with only 2 to 4 units in San Francisco at the time, showed a decrease in rental availability, but that was the study attributed to condo conversions and remodels where the unit was taken off and could have been remodeled and put back on the market differently. I think the issue of rental supply is a different issue than the issue of overall housing supply. If a unit is occupied and people are complaining about the supply and demand effects, having one fewer person in the market looking for housing shows that the demand would also go down. People are staying in the houses and not being evicted. There's fewer people looking for rental housing, so the supply issue is a wash. That's it. I would request that the council please reach out to me to discuss any specific issues in my written comments. Thanks.
Great, thank you, PJ. Okay, next comment.
Next speaker will come from Philip.
Welcome, Phyllis.
Hi, my name is Philip Scalaveri,
Philip.
not Philip. Thank you. I'm calling from Fairfax. I'm deeply involved in fighting the ordinances here. I want to start off by saying and reminding all of the council of Larkspur, I'm not here to lobby you. Your citizens should make their own decisions. And but I do want to point out a couple things. One is, and this is a direct quote, capitalism is a system designed by the wealthy elite to exploit working people for their own profit. End of quote. That's the DSA. Those are the folks that lobbied hard here and had unprecedented access to our council and passed these terrible ordinances in Fairfax. That's number one. The second thing I want to say to you guys is really, really important, unless you want to end up like the citizens of Fairfax did, and by extension, our council, it's critical that you listen to all stakeholders, not just one side. And I would follow that up by saying, I believe it's very important to include your citizens via the vote so that you get their approval for this. That's something our council never did. They were incurious and they passed this thing on their own without understanding what the citizens of Fairfax would accept and what they wanted. And I think that that was a critical mistake on their part. I also believe they're going to lose the general election, and that's going to have sweeping consequences for the rest of Marin. If you're going to do something there in Larkspur, which I believe we should have done something here in Fairfax, make sure to start off with all critical stakeholders at the table and make sure that you do plenty of quality outreach so that your citizens understand what's happening in their own town and they have a voice. If 53% of the people who live in Fairfax are renters, that alone should tell you to go to a vote.
All right, thank you, Phil. Thanks for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Kate Raphael Smith.
Welcome, Kate.
Thank you very much for your time. And I am calling from NorCal Commercial. I'm a local business owner and I grew up in Marin County and am a renter at this time. I am calling because I conduct an annual survey of Marin apartments, over 7,000 units. And I just want to discuss the fact that the data shows since the passing of AB 1482 in 2019, Marin rents increased an average of 1.61% per year. 1.61%, that's a data point. Now, prior to AB 1482 being passed, the data over 10 years showed that the average percent per year of rents being increased was 5%. So from that data, we can see that 1482 has been effective in providing residents with a fair percent of increase, and that 1482 was passed by the state with stakeholders involved that were very well versed on this topic and creating a fair and equitable way to move forward for both housing providers and tenants. And the housing providers bought into this and they want to be a part of the solution. And I just encourage you to really take your time and make sure that you are engaging the community before you make decisions when there may not be a need to.
Okay, Kate, that's it. Thank you so much for your comment. Yeah, thanks. Next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Michael Sexton.
Welcome, Michael.
Great, thank you very much. I'm the director of the Marin Residence and an advocate of making Marin affordable for tenants and protecting housing providers. I urge you to maintain the fair and equitable housing policies by strictly adhering to California AB 1482 that was passed in 2019. Every community needs to deal with their own unique housing situation, and I'm not here to tell you guys what to do, but every community faces challenges. However, whereas California 1482 may not be perfect, this uniform regulation helps level the playing field throughout California. Extra rent control is an attempt at solving a statewide and national issue and is doomed to fail because it skews market economics. Making housing more expensive by restricting how housing providers can deal with tenants through extra rent control is not the best interest, not in the best interests of the citizens of Larkspur or Marin. As evidenced in Fairfax and backed up by numerous studies, extra rent control policies only divide the community, help remove needed rental housing from the market, and drive up rental prices for those that need it most. In addition, in Fairfax, the Keep Fairfax Fair Act, which will soon be submitted, is finally letting the Fairfax residents vote on these ordinances. Any extra rent control that Larkspur City Council will enact without a vote of the people may result in a similar ballot initiative and division in your town. Since this extra rent control discussion was brought out by the action of a specific apartment complex, Skylark, and not the grassroots effort of the majority of tenants, I urge you to craft a solution for this specific situation, not a broad policy that negatively affects many of the residents, homeowners, and mom and pop landlords of your town. I urge you to let AB 1482 have time to work to make Marin more affordable and not apply onerous extra rent control, which is already an expensive to what is already an expensive
Great.
situation.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Michael.
you. Thank you.
Sure. Next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Isaiah Gonzalez.
Asaya, if I got that right, welcome. You may be muted. I'll start when you can get your audio up.
They'll ask you to unmute on my end.
Good evening, everyone. City of Larkspur, your mayor, your council. Thank you for your time and your considerations. My name is Asaya Gonzalez, and I'll say up front that I am not a resident of Larkspur. I am listening in from Petaluma, California. I am doing so because we just passed our own, we just adopted our own Tenant Protection Act. And it's been very interesting and very empowering for myself, having grown up a renter my entire life. One of 5 kids, having experienced homelessness and eviction, I can say that I am someone who receives mental health services and has complex compounded PTSD as a result of those experiences. I can also say that I've experienced homelessness as an adult with my own children. However, I am also a Marine Corps veteran, so I was lucky enough to have access to additional resources. All of that being said, if anyone has issue with my comment, perhaps there is issue also with stakeholders and the people who own properties who live outside of Larkspur. We've experienced the same sort of pushback from landlords that I've witnessed here. And I think that it is incredible that for a municipality with a population of 12,000, more than 12,000, and 54% of that being renters, I'm sorry that you guys don't have more renter representation there to give comment and to be present. It is true that they're probably at work. So that is why I felt the need to speak up and to say thank you for what you guys are doing, because it's not just an issue in Larkspur, it's an issue everywhere. Housing.
Isaiah, I think that's it. That's it. But thank you so much for calling in and for a very moving testimony. Next speaker, please.
The next speaker is Angela Mercado.
Welcome, Angela.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I chose to speak tonight. I've spoken at all your meetings over the last couple of months I just want to say that I understand the position of landlords. I really do. But I think they forget that not all of us who have lived here have gone to college and make $150,000 a year. We do the best we can to, live in a safe place and pay our bills, and to have a constant increase of rent is like really hard on some of us. I'm 71 years old and I have custody of 2 of my grandchildren, and they're both special needs. I do the best I can. I pay my bills on time. But if things continue to go up at the rate they are, I don't know how long I'm actually going to be able to keep us in a place. And, I got a rent increase this year, 2 months early, at 5.72% instead of the normal. It's usually around maybe $60 to $80. It was $129 this year. And it keeps going up and up and up. And I understand that, landlords have to pay their workers. They have to keep their buildings up. But in my opinion, if you have a good tenant who maintains their property and doesn't destroy it and pays their bills on time, maybe you should take that into consideration and stop worrying about how much you can raise the rent every year. I've lived here for 30 years and I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to hang on here. I'm doing my best because this is my home. But I think there needs to be some kind of cap or protection or something for those of us who do
Angela,
have limited income.
Yeah, Angela, thank you. Thank you for your comment. Yeah, we ran out of time there. Next speaker, please.
Looking for any additional raised hands from our Zoom audience members. Next speak. Oh, excuse me. There's no additional public comment.
Okay, great. So let me bring it back to the room here one more time. We had a bunch of speakers. Anybody would like to come up to the mic, please? Kurt, I recognize you with your red shirt there.
Thank you, Council. Yeah, I gotta get the baby home. So appreciate this. My name's Kurt Reese. I'm a renter from San Anselmo and also one of the co-chairs of the Marin chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. Yeah, I think I want to speak to points that are related to things that Councilmember or Mayor Paulson and Councilmember Candela brought up around housing stock. So, I mean, to reinforce PJ's point, right, the one study that there is more robust data around in terms of measuring actual loss of housing stock following rent control is the Stanford study on San Francisco. And it's a conversion from rental to other types of housing. It's not a net decrease in housing. I think the housing stock that you've mentioned happening in Fairfax now, the anecdotal we've heard is almost exclusively ADUs and JDUs, which it seems like you all are considering potentially exempting. And if not, even if you don't, very few of those are actually used for long-term housing for families and workforce and so forth. They're often used, in-laws and family members and, your extra, at-home gym, all those kind of things. So I don't really feel like we've heard robust empirical evidence showing that this housing happens. And another thought exercise I thought of is this has been passed in 20 jurisdictions, give or take a few, and all across California. If there was a clear kind of, immediate impact where like, you got a 10% hit of housing stock loss, like every time you do this, that would have come up. Like we would see like across the 20 jurisdictions that was something that happened, and it's not. So I think in the absence of any really robust empirical evidence around this core unintended consequence, that seems to be the main thing you all are worrying about. Like contrast that to the overwhelming moral benefits, the overwhelming common good that will be definitively achieved by giving housing security to half your population and preventing hundreds and hundreds of families from displacement. It's just the right thing to do. I encourage you to do so. Thank you.
Great. Kurt, thank you for your comment. Next speaker.
Hello, Mayor Paulson, Council and staff. My name is Romeo Arrieta with the Marin Association of Realtors. I represent 1,400 realtors that do business all over Marin County. Several of them help people who are buying and selling homes. Most of my members do not represent folks that own apartments that are multi-unit. Most of the folks that we're talking about and concerned are small mom and pop, own a duplex, maybe 2 or 3. Several of them are also senior citizens. Several may be even on a fixed income and rely on that rental income for retirement. I do want to apologize to the council for my late breaking email, but as I'm sure you've seen, we have evidence, and I'm hearing there's not a study. I'm hearing facts on the ground from realtors in Fairfax of units being pulled off of the market. Yes, some of them are ADUs and JDUs. Some of them are duplexes. So I want to say that there are real effects to some of these policies. I certainly would welcome that ADUs and JDUs be exempt, but I really want to mention that these rising costs affect everybody, including property owners. There is no cap on construction costs. There is no caps on getting a plumber. So I thank you for your careful consideration and look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next speaker, please.
Hi, Karen Horstmeyer from Greenbrae.
Welcome.
Thank you. I've been in both sides. I've been a renter and I've been a landlord. I am a landlord. When I was a renter, I lived in San Jose. There was a job I really wanted, and I volunteered and had to work 2 other jobs, and at 25, shared a room with somebody to afford my rent. And I could not live in Cupertino or Sunnyvale because I couldn't afford it. But the way I could afford it was the way I did it. And eventually the job I volunteered for, I was able to get. Fast forward a number of years, I have a son who can't afford rent, but yes, I am a landlord. And it seems to me that the problem is the corporate landlords. And my gosh, the passion that all of you have is incredible. And I have that passion a little bit on the other side in many ways, because it seems to me it's the corporate landlords. I'm a mom and pop landlord. Okay. And you know what? I have a property that's under market. I have great tenants. I've had them, some in there for 11 years, some in for 5 years, and now these ones in for 2 years. I haven't raised the rent in 2 years. And these rules, and correct me if I'm wrong, did not state of California put in rent control? So to have additional rent control laws, and Mr. Kendall, I want to address your question, why not just put something in? It complicates things. Lawyers, tenants have free lawyers. Landlords do not get free lawyers, okay? It's a lot of money on a landlord. The good landlords go after the corporate landlords. Just see a few more things.
Got about
Bring it.
seconds.
Okay, thank you.
And go ahead, just a second or two.
Ms. Way, appreciate your comments about bringing it to a vote. The vote is for the people. We've had 2 people come up here and say it's not all of the people.
Okay, Chair.
That's why we vote. Please bring it to a vote.
Thank you.
Rather than have 5 make a decision.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, next speaker, please. Again, I apologize. I hate cutting people off, but you guys see the lights.
Good evening, everyone. Most of you know who I am by now. My name is Angelina Soldatos. I am with the California Apartment Association, and I'm also a Marin County resident. I was born and raised here, so I hope that humanizes me a bit. CAA respectfully asks the City Council to question the city staff's failure to include rental housing providers' stakeholder input during the research and drafting of the numerous staff reports. We have offered to provide subject matter expertise and key perspective for the group of individuals who will be shouldering the financial burden of the explored ordinance and have yet to receive a response. To uphold transparency and equity, CAA strongly urges Larkspur City staff bring all rental housing industry leaders to policy discussions? Have you asked your local rental housing providers if they could continue operating with the added regulations being explored? At the last meeting, I provided City Council and city staff with a blueprint for solutions-based policy that would greatly benefit current and future Larkspur residents. We welcome this opportunity to discuss with city staff our extensive subject matter expertise to truly implement long-term solutions-based policy that will benefit the entire community now and for future generations, without burdening your local housing providers, and promote more rental housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelina. Okay, next speaker. Okay. There you go.
Hi, my name is Ann Clark from Larkspur Courts. A few of the council members have expressed concern about fair market and how a rent control ordinance would affect the landlord's ability to get fair market value for their rentals. Excuse me. Well, in regards to fair market value, the landlord is already getting the fair market value by their base rents. These are already high rent upon move-in. To determine what they can charge for their vacant rentals at fair market value, they asked the property management staff excuse me, to call around other properties for their base rents in their weekly market surveys. This is how a landlord determines the fair market value for their current vacant rentals, by hearing what other competitive apartment communities in the area are charging for their base rents. In none of these market survey phone calls has it ever been asked, what are you charging for rent increases? Sorry. The rent control ordinance that the renters are asking for is to stabilize rent increases. They're not asking to touch the high base rents, just asking the city council for tightening up the California tenant protection from 10% cap to a much lower rent increase, preferably 5% or lower, ideally 2 or 3%, what it was before the price gouging took effect.
Thank you. Thank you, Ann. Okay, next speaker, please.
Hello, City Council. Mayor Paulson, I have a question before you start my time. If I have a question for you and the city manager, how do I ask that?
I'd rather not do questions, public comment. You can make your question, but we're going to get to deliberations. I'll try to address some points. Let me start your time again since you said that. But tonight, 2 minutes, and I'd rather you provide us with information. Thank you.
Okay. So Mayor Paulson, I'll just address real quickly. I think the proposal that you're making, and hopefully you can answer it for us, is if you had suggested 5% and then plus CPI, and then to a cap with a cap of 7%. And if CPI is historically 2 or 3%, then 5 plus 2 or 3 would be exactly what the cap is. So maybe consider, like adjusting that number. And then also, was just wondering, city manager, how much, I think you had mentioned in the previous meeting, how much it would cost to actually bring a ballot, how much it would cost the city to bring a ballot, because I think that the public should know that. And then one of the things that I just wanted to do is kind of bring us back to why we were here in the first place. We're here because for the last 9 months, Larkspur tenants, not just at Skylark, as you have seen over the months, is that there's been tenants from all over Larkspur telling you that there's a crisis, there's something going on in Larkspur. Folks are going to be forced out of their homes, specifically because AB 1482 allows rents to really go up really high. 5% plus CPI. Usually right now it's about between 8, for last year was 10%. We don't know what it's going to be, but it's definitely going to be more than 7 for this year. So what we're asking is that you consider what your constituents have been talking about. Is 53% of us. Yes, not all of them came here, but it's a really good representation across the board of who's here. And we're here because folks are getting forced out. We're asking you, as you're considering giving direction to staff, that you consider a rollback date of last August, when Mayor Kandel actually agendized the matter, and to make sure that there's relocation payments that are equal to at least 4 months, so that it can enable folks to come back if they're evicted through no fault of their own, to live within the same community. So just encouraging you again to just remember that the folks that have been coming here are Larkspur residents and not from out of the city.
Okay, thank you, Njoki.
My pleasure.
Great. We have one more person, or maybe more, but anyway, welcome.
Thank you, Will Madison with Prime. Appreciate the time. Obviously, this is a complicated issue. Just understanding existing law of AB 1482 is complicated. I don't think anyone's disputing there are people that need help, right? There are people who live in Larkspur who, just have Social Security and their savings, and that doesn't cover very much. And we think the best solution is means-tested rental assistance. That's what we've done. 31 people are in our most helpful program, and 31 people are still in that program. We have had no one leave after we've given that help. The rents for those people will be lower than when we moved in, well into 2024. And that's because we gave a 15% discount, and then we limited increases thereafter. We gave people the choice of CPI or 5%. So to be able to preserve and avoid the displacement of those 31 people, and then another 90 people who, if they make less than the Marin County average, also have a limitation, we think is going to help with the displacement issue. So that's 125 people. We think that is the solution for those most in need. The proposals before us may seem moderate. They also, by the city's own acknowledgement, will cost at least $200,000 a year. That's not a small number. And to undertake that and put that money towards a rental registry, which I don't think will benefit residents or landlords directly, seems like a lot of spending. So thank you for the time and your consideration.
Great, thank you, Will. All right.
Hi, my name's Dorothy. I live here in Larkspur. We need our any ordinance that you draft and vote on to be applicable to as widely as possible a population of renters in Larkspur, including duplexes and small apartment buildings as state law will allow. All tenants deserve rent stabilization and protections from unfair evictions. I have not yet heard from any of you why it is that tenants who live in those kinds of units would not necessarily need the same protections that people at Skylark do or that people at Bon Air do. Please take care of those people as well. We all just need someplace to be. We want to be someplace. If you send it to the ballot, folks, I need you to know that every week I find out about another neighbor who has moved out because they can't afford the rent increase. And it's happening now. And there's a brick on the gas pedal for these landlords who are, I understand, just trying to take care of themselves. But because we're going through this, there's a brick on the gas pedal to raise rents. And people who have never had, outside of Skylark, who have never had such high rent raises are having them now. This is an emergency. We cannot wait to put it on the ballot. And if you put it on the ballot, if you take that long, we have to question your intention. Who are you behind? who is it, who has got you in their back pocket if you put it on the ballot?
Dorothy, that's 2 minutes. Thank you. All right. Next comment. Yep. Oh, you both can go, so
Okay.
order probably doesn't matter.
Tag team this one.
Okay. Go ahead.
Wrap. Reed Baxter, Greenbrae Management. I represent Bon Air Apartments, over 12 different landlords, been a long time resident here. Also a renter. Understanding the housing business in Larkspur is much more dynamic than just looking at rent rolls. Particularly in our situation, we have older buildings. We've built these over a 70-year period of time. We have an evolving California building code that we have to meet. We have ongoing modernization efforts. Construction costs are pretty serious. I have a construction team that works for me around the clock. Landlords have statutory expenses, SB 721, pools and others. These aren't elective. We have to do these. The mom and pops have to do this. Well, inflation has fallen down from 9% last July. Material costs are elastic. Steel is up 20% from last year. Our company is a leader in SB 721 activity in the county and the city. Depreciation for this work, we don't get to do that in 1 year. That's over 30 years. So there's not some tax argument to do this stuff. It's not even an option. Our overhead, aside from the statutory expenses, our overhead costs go up as well every year. Insurance is up 50% this year over last. Staffing is 5 to 7% year over last. Utilities are up 20%. Love Marin Municipal Water District, 20% on water this year. This council passed 5% fees from Marin sanitary work. On top of that, we have the AB 1383 compliance work, new compost bins. If anybody wants raccoons, I can hook you up. Evictions, haven't had issues with no fault evictions. We don't push people out of their homes to do work. We pride ourselves in that. Been a responsible landlord in that department. The appeal board that you guys mentioned on the 8th, we're not a fan of that. Tenants don't play a role in construction or electing when work needs to be done on a building. We don't get to choose that.
Reed, sorry, got to cut you off, but if you can submit the rest in public comment, that'd be great. But yeah, thank you for all that. Next speaker, I think someone else was.
Hi there.
Hi.
Keith, I'm a renter in Larkspur. A lot of other people said stuff that was important, but something that was brought up at the last meeting that I think should come up is we're talking about Kevin Haroff on the end here talked about, let's not put this on the ballot. Let's do this tonight. And I think he's right, because why put in the ballot? You know how it's going to go. When they do renter control laws for all of California, it's lost. It's never lost in anyone it's done at a city level, because there's always gonna be more renters. At one of the last meetings, and you use the term like punting, it's dodging. It's just putting it off so you can say, well, it's not us, it came up on the ballot. You know what you should do, because you don't just represent people, you have the chance to protect people. The other Kevin brought up at one of the last meetings a number of examples of people at the I don't know what the right word is. I don't want to say trailer park. That almost sounds rude, but it's the trailers and stuff. People who are moving out. There's lots. This isn't just about Skylark. There's people all over Marin, elderly people, especially on fixed incomes, who can't afford the increase of rents. Someone recently just said tonight that there's like 1.6%. No, it's like 3, 4, 5% consistently for the last 5 or 6 years and such. The other issues that Catherine brought up at one of the previous meetings, that someone who owns like a duplex had said, if they do rent control, what's even the purpose of, renting it out? I'm like, yeah, right. They're not, so they can't make $4,000 a month. They're going to make $3,000. This is easy to get those people happy. Just if it's 3 units or less, then this doesn't apply to them, because the people renting the kind of a duplex and such, those aren't the people in such need. Those usually much higher money. Those are families, etc. I think it should go on the ballot because you can help and protect the majority of people. The math says going up the most Larkspur residents is some sort of rent stabilization helps. That's it, just under the wire. Okay.
Thank you for watching the clock. Thanks for your comments, Keith. Okay, next speaker. Oh my God, really? So we've been at this for 2 hours. And I think I have no doubt about that. Oh, yeah, please, go ahead. Sorry, I was about to.
Because I was online and then.
Okay, why don't you just tell us your name and we'll
My
get all
name
that.
is Susan Whitney. I live in Larkspur.
Okay, go ahead, Susan.
And I came dashing over because I raised my hand in the Zoom, but they said, oh, no more comments on the Zoom. But I'm like, I do have a comment. So I don't know how that happened. But so I'm a little out of breath. So what I want to say is I support AB 14482. And I think that rent control is not a viable option for Larkspur or really anywhere else. I haven't seen any evidence where it really works, but you can show me otherwise. I also support the city manager's comments earlier in the evening of like, what are we really approving or not approving? Because I looked online and I'm like, what is the actual language here? And as he mentioned, well, there isn't any. Like, what are you even doing here tonight? What are you even approving or disapproving? And so, you know, I would like to say, I don't think it's up to you guys, you know, since you don't even know what you're doing, you know, necessarily. That perhaps it would be more appropriate to have a vote in Larkspur on this very important measure. And I have to say that I'm not, I'm a homeowner. I don't rent to anybody, but I would like perhaps the option in the future to do so. And I don't really want local control other than
Susan, that's our 2 minutes.
what exists already. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your comment there, and the compliment. All right. So, any other people want to get up and talk? So I am, oh no. Ooh, it's like a bad movie. Okay, go ahead, Dennis. All right, let's go.
I take that as a compliment. Dennis Gilardi, Larkspur resident. It's very short and sweet. Susan and I have been talking about this registry and controls and everything else. I support the current state law, or we support it. We oppose any kind of rental registry that's going to be paid for by us property owners. I don't think it's going to provide anything. And I'm very concerned about privacy of personal information. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dennis. Okay. Anyone else? Well. So. Okay, so it's 7:30. We've been sitting here for 2 hours, and I want to make sure we all get a chance to take a break. I just wanted to bring it back to the council and see, is that okay with you guys? We take 5 minutes. I think that would clear everybody's head out a little bit, and we've got some work ahead. So seeing no opposition, it's 7:37 on my clock. Let's actually take 8 minutes. We'll come back at 1:15 and do a bio break or whatever you need. Great. Okay, so I think we need one more member on the dais and anybody else coming in. And for those of you out there in Zoom, thanks for your patience with all this, and all those who are remaining here. Thank you for coming and staying. So, kind of back to the introduction, we, all said our thoughts and our questions. We got, quite a lot of public comment tonight. I wanted to comment on the comment, but I don't think that's necessary. I mean, I think, a lot has been hashed over many, many times, but there was some very good information. And to me, there's always something new. So what I'd like to do is maybe again, bring it back to the council. I'm back to thinking what's going to expedite the process. And, I had said earlier that I'm looking at a few red lines here, and I think we're pretty split on some issues and we need 3 votes. So, we can see how far option 1 goes. I think the exercise is good because if we go to option 2, then, we're already in the running for what an ordinance might look like. And, my vote, if we're to speak each is, I would, if there's a stricter version, I would support that. I think what's really good about putting it to the ballot is you have to not say what's, a council member think is right or wrong. You have to really craft this where it's going to pass. So you have to think about, what's really going to work for the whole community. So that all being said, I don't know, first of all, as city manager or council, if there's anything you wanted to clarify or say, and otherwise I was just going to bring it back to the council for some discussion. I take that as a no. Okay. So it is, let's see if any of the council members just want to speak to what was said or what should go next.
I want to start with just a couple of quick questions to probably our city attorney. I think I probably know the answers, but I just want to verify what Prime is doing, which is like a means tested model. I'm assuming we as a city do not have the authority to require landlords to have any type of means tested model. I imagine the result would be then they're not going to rent it to people who, can't afford it. Actually, because if the landlord is paying for it, they're not going to rent it to these people. So I'm assuming that's a non-starter. Is that true?
I'm not aware of any instance in which a city has required the owner of rental property that's already operational and has existing tenants to implement basically an affordable housing program. So I'm not sure that's been tested because I'm not sure that anybody has attempted to implement that. At the approval stage, cities can use various tools to bring some units to within under an affordability program, and sometimes developers will voluntarily, because that's their model, restrict all units in a building. But I'm just not aware of a city that's attempted to require owners of rental property to implement such a program when it's already an operational rental housing situation. So no, it's just not sure that there's anything out there to guide a analysis of that.
All right. Next question is, if we can't require the landlords to do that, and we decided as a city we wanted to do that, and we said we as a city want to subsidize anybody who is earning less than whatever we decide it is. Do you have any idea what that would cost us?
It would cost as much as you want it to cost, and you'd have to tell me what program to cut it from. We talked about this at the last meeting, and my response at that time was, in the absence of a revenue stream, I would, if that's a path the council wants to go on, I'd encourage you to think about a special tax, because the only way I could make that work would basically be to shut down the library or shut down recreation, so I could generate the 6-figure amount that would be needed on an annual basis just to run a pittance of a program too. The county operates these programs. They operate them with a lot of pass-through money, and they burn through that money at a pretty incredible rate because the need is out there. And they have these funds constantly coming in from the state and federal level. We can't really get in that cycle. One thing to remember is the county is an extension of the state of California, and therefore it operates housing policy for the state. We're not. We're a corporate entity at the local level, a municipality, that we would have to go into the competitive market to get that kind of grant funding.
So if we wanted to do a means tested program, which again, that's always been my first choice. It could be voluntary, right? But people could just say no. That's a problem. We can't force the landlords to do it. We could put it on the ballot, and say, hey, we're going to do a tax. If the people of Larkspur would like to subsidize the less fortunate Larkspur residents, everybody chip in an extra blah, 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 whether it's, however we choose to do it. And that's a potential way if we decided that that was something we wanted to do. Is that accurate?
Theoretically, yes.
Okay. And another question, just a legal question, I just want to understand. If we decided hypothetically, and again, I don't know if anybody has any appetite for this, that we wanted to draw a line somewhere and say, hey, we want to do rent stabilization only for units of 12 or more units, or, we picked a number, whatever we all felt comfortable with. And we legally do that, or is there some equal protection issue of favoring certain property owners over others?
My office is still doing some research on that. We haven't reached the end of that yet. We will, if council gives us, we'll reach the end of it in a short time period anyway. If a majority of the council says you want to pursue something along those lines, that's an uncommon number. I mean, the 3 or fewer is pretty typical. So I believe that's well established that that's defensible, but some other number of units will definitely focus in on that as part of our research. I think what we've said in the past as well is that we'd also need to establish as part of the adoption of any ordinance what the basis is, so that we have a record that establishes that there is a governmental purpose behind drawing the line there as opposed to another place.
Okay,
At a minimum.
So three or less is established safe. Anything other than that, we have to look into.
I think that we can assume that 3 or fewer is a very common number in a number of these ordinances, and would be a safe way. It's just the other numbers that are less common. So we just need to make sure that we've pinned that down.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for letting me ask those questions.
Sure. That's any other questions? Councilmember Harif.
Not a question, but an encouragement. We have a proposal for an ordinance before us tonight. And I guess, and I apologize, I apologize if I'm expressing some sense of frustration here, but we've been kind of dancing around the issue of whether or not we're going to move forward as a council in support of an ordinance. We have the framework of an ordinance in front of us tonight. I would like to encourage the council to kind of pony up to the table and make a decision about whether we are going to proceed with an ordinance or not. If we are going to proceed with an ordinance, there are some questions that need to be answered about certain aspects of it, but really not a lot. I'm very comfortable with the general parameters, what staff has recommended for an ordinance tonight. And subject to discussion about issues like what exactly the cap would be, which I'm prepared to, move forward on myself. I think it's important for us and for the benefit of the public to cut to the chase and make a decision tonight, now, if possible, about whether we're going to move forward with an ordinance or not. I think it's only fair to the public for the public to understand where we are on that issue. So I kind of would like to call a question.
Okay, noted. Any other comments?
No, you want to call the question? Do you want him to?
I mean, I'd like to, before you do, to say that I'm going to vote no on much of what you want. So I think what I was saying before is that going through this, I don't think that we're punting. I don't think that we're delaying. I think there are 10 line items, much of which we haven't decided. I believe Councilmember Haroff, your original intention was simplicity. I think we've heard from the comments and seen from the technical detail, this is anything but simple. If you want to push it forward, I'm not prepared to vote yes on what's in front of us. So just know that.
And that's fine. That's why I'm calling the question. I would like, if possible, to get a sense from the council about whether we are prepared to move forward along the lines of what staff has recommended, recognizing that there are some gaps to be filled in the staff's proposal. But as I said, am pretty comfortable with what staff has proposed in terms of an ordinance. We do have to, if we're going to move down in that direction, we do have some issues that have to be resolved within the framework of a decision to move forward with an ordinance. But I think the first question is, are we as a council prepared to move forward with an ordinance or not?
Yeah, I mean, if the question we can answer in turn for me, let's be specific. One of the leading issues is the cap. And I believe as written, it was 4%, and I don't remember if there was any CPI inclusion.
Well, I think the staff was recommending a couple of options that have been considered at some length in previous meetings.
The
Correct me if I'm wrong.
staff in your last workshop suggested the 4% figure that's contained in the city of Oxnard's ordinance, and the council, there was a majority that said that wasn't an acceptable number. So the staff presented in the draft ordinance the numbers blank so that you could decide what it would be. At your last public hearing, there seemed to be two options that we heard a lot, so we identified them for you in the staff report for discussion purposes. But essentially what staff has recommended to you is that we think the simplicity of the Oxnard framework is a good starting basis for an ordinance. But there's a number of holes we've left based on your conversation. And I think I'm taking Councilmember Harf's indicating he's generally comfortable with the Oxnard ordinance as serving as the basis for the conversation. But staff hasn't actually given you recommendations now at this point on a couple key things, because it's been clear that council wanted to deliberate those issues.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, can I?
Yeah, I think actually, Councilmember Carroll and then Kendall.
Go ahead.
I just want to respond. I hear that you'd like to push this forward. I think the reality is we can't vote on an ordinance without having numbers. So we have to actually talk about the numbers.
And that wasn't my request. My request was to have this council make a decision tonight about whether we are moving forward with an ordinance, recognizing, as the city manager just pointed out, that there are some important parameters that still need to be defined. But I think it's best to define them within the framework of a decision to move forward or not to move forward with an ordinance. Because if we're not going to move forward with an ordinance, then the details of the ordinance are moot. There's no point in even discussing them.
Agreed. And I mean, I believe that we've all decided to move forward with an ordinance already. And we're filling in the blanks now. And then we're going to vote on, what's.
Have
filled in
we?
the
I'm not
blanks.
sure that I
think that's
I'm
what
not
started
sure
this
that I
last.
understand that that's the case.
Okay, that's my understanding.
Again, I believe that it depends what goes in the blanks. I mean, if we put in, whatever 60% of CPI, I don't think it's going to pass. If we put in, 5 plus, and maybe up to 7, it might. I'm not saying it will, but that would be a conversation. But then again, I don't know, Councilman Haroff or Councilman Carroll, if you'd be interested in an ordinance that had those types of numbers. So this is about the numbers. It's not about a skeleton with no numbers, because the numbers are what's going to determine whether this has any viability, in my opinion.
I'm sorry, to me, that's putting the cart before the horse. If we don't have a consensus that we are going to adopt an ordinance, and maybe I'm missing something. Maybe we do have a consensus that we are moving forward with a rent stabilization ordinance. And that's what you just told me we've already agreed to,
I don't
I
think we
guess.
have
And
either.
I don't think we have.
Yeah.
So that's the question I'm trying to call. Is this council committed to moving forward with a rent stabilization ordinance? I would very much like to see this council make it clear to the public that that is either the case or not the case. I understand that there are important parameters that need to be fleshed out. I have my own views about what a cap could be. Others may have a different view about what the cap may be. But one way or another, if we're going to have an ordinance, we're going to have a cap. And we just need to figure out what that cap may be. I don't think we have come to a consensus on this council that we are moving forward with a rent stabilization ordinance. And that is the question that I would like to call. Have we or have we not?
And I'm sorry, just if I may, Mr. Mayor.
And then Councilmember Carroll, but go ahead.
All right,
Finish up.
so just, I'm trying to be as clear as I can. I can't tell you if I want to move forward on a rent stabilization ordinance without knowing the blanks. So I can't.
Then the answer is no.
So be it.
Councilmember Carroll.
Correct me if I'm misinterpreting, but I believe in your introductory comments, you indicated you wanted an ordinance. You, the mayor.
Yes, I did.
Okay. And a second question would be how we would proceed, whether the council would pass it or it would go to the voters. You brought that up.
Mhm.
As a possibility for either this November or next April.
March.
Or March, excuse me. So is that, if that still is your then position, then I think we have 3 members that want an ordinance.
Yeah, I mean, maybe.
So my
I'm sorry.
suggestion is then we proceed on that basis, define our terms, and then answer that other question that you've raised of whether or not to put it on the ballot. And that would satisfy your needs to know what we're actually going with.
Well,
And
no, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I can, well, you guys go, and then I'd like to clarify as well, but Catherine.
To your point, Kevin, the exercise we went through, I understood at the last meeting was the exercise of crafting an ordinance, but we did not decide, in my understanding, that we were going to accept an ordinance or move forward with it. But the idea was to do the exercise to craft it in case it became a ballot measure, so that we had certain language that was part of the process.
I don't agree with that characterization.
So well, that's what we need to clarify now is where we are. And I think we need to your point, decide or not keep beating around it.
Yeah, I'm going to ask maybe staff for some clarification because it feels like I am being asked, am I in favor of an ordinance that is full of blanks and unknowns where I may be in favor of an ordinance if, depending on how we fill in those blanks or unknowns, that I don't. Could you maybe give us your opinions in the situation?
From where I sit, it does not appear to me that there is yet a majority to vote on a specific ordinance with all of these terms fleshed out. But I have heard a majority of the council indicate a willingness to work on that. So I guess to me, I think what Councilman Hoff has been asking is, are we willing to work this out and put something to a final vote? I think I heard a majority say that, yes, you're willing to work on this, but that your ultimate vote on the ordinance may be contingent on the work.
What the numbers.
I think that's what I've heard.
I think that's correct.
And I don't think those two perspectives are inconsistent and that's not what I was suggesting.
So I think if my summary is correct, you could probably just all nod heads now and roll up your sleeves and argue about the.
Yeah, and
terms.
that's what I wanted to say. I mean, maybe this is semantics, maybe it's getting late, but the original intention was, about 4 weeks ago, there was a fork in the road. Do we just sort of table this or do we move forward? And to me, moving forward to your calling the question, Councilmember Haroff, is that we're working, I'm committed to, and I think, Councilmember Candel, we're committed to putting together an ordinance that we can vote on. Now, the confusion is, will it be, adopted or not? And so, Councilmember Candel, I think we're going to work on this till the end. If we, put in the number 2/3 CPI 5%, you don't like it, you'll vote no. But so I think the confusion is we're not guaranteeing an ordinance that is passed will come out of this. So you're not asking for that.
And I'm not asking for that.
Yeah, so I think we're getting a little lost in words. We're moving forward and filling in the blanks tonight, and the intention is to vote on this. We do want to vote on this. I'd like to see an ordinance passed. I think both of you, that's, and if it doesn't, for me, option B was, to say we couldn't pass an ordinance. And, we have the option of having a draft committee and putting something together that we put on the ballot and let the voter decide. Does that clarify or is that obfuscate?
No, that's helpful. And I think in my early, excuse me for interrupting, but I think my comments earlier was I'm very much opposed to from the outset, putting this thing or going in a direction that would place this on a ballot measure. I think it's important for this council to be affirmative in its expression of desire to have an ordinance that is adopted by the council. I think we can talk meaningfully about what some of the important parameters would be. The cap is the most important one of those. And I frankly am going to be flexible on what the outcome of that discussion might be, although I do have my own views. But I want to make sure that's the direction that we're taking. We're looking towards adoption of an ordinance by this council, which will include a cap to be decided by this council. And other parameters to be decided by this council. And I would like to see us make progress substantially towards that end tonight.
Yeah, I think that's my intention. I think that was your intention as well. Councilmember Way, is that your? Okay, it may not be your intention. I mean, that's part of the procedural piece here is, we have to have some level of consensus or we're not going to get our 3 votes. So, I've been trying to, find that path and that was my option 1, option 2 talk. So with that said, are we all clear or do we need to talking about? Okay, so let's move forward. So I think, thank you, staff. I got a little bit lost in the detail, but it's all on the public website if anyone wants to take a look. Staff came back and please let us know if this is most helpful in providing direction. So the shaded areas here are saying, look, these are the cues we took from you. If you can, choose one of the bullet points, we have more direction. And as Councilmember Harris said, that moves us closer to the finish line. Is that a good way to proceed?
Yeah, my summary is a little more nuanced. The shaded things are things that your city attorney and I felt we heard at the last meeting from you. Whether those are definitive or drive your conversations up to you.
Okay.
Now I have a question for the city attorney.
Please.
One of the first points, and that is the start date of August of last year. Is that valid?
It's another area where we're doing research. I think that date was be potentially problematic because the city manager and I have conferred and the actual agenda statement for that is not necessarily clear that the council was actually considering adopting any form of rent stabilization at that point. I think it was agendized as an opportunity for the public to address the council on the topic. But we're still researching whether or not what the cases have said about where the rollback date can start. But that all is premised on a majority of the council saying you actually want to have a rollback date in the ordinance, which we have not yet heard from council.
Is there a date you're comfortable with right now?
I'd need to review each of the agendas to actually see how it was framed.
How soon could you get back to us with the number?
Whenever the council next meet on this topic, we'll be able to answer that question.
Okay. Fine.
We're having another meeting on this. Sorry, public, but
Mayor, for the record.
Mr. Mayor, can I chime in? Because I want the complexity to be clear. Most of the cities with rollbacks that I've seen, the council took an action saying, we are now officially debating this and it's going to take us a while to get this done. And this is the start of the clock. So that's part of the nuanced challenge of your question. That didn't happen in Larkspur. So there was no sort of notice to the community that this is the line that we're drawing. So that's what Mr. Woodruff and I have been sort of going back and seeing what other cities have done.
Okay, no, I didn't appreciate that. It's just, and I want to do it legal, but
I just want to make sure.
I just want to know.
You understood it. That's part of our complexity. We're trying to find examples.
I know, I completely understand, but it's just, to me, that's an important issue. And if it is to other members, that's why I'm asking and framed it that way.
No, I appreciate that. And even though it's not I'm not sure if it's on the list in the agenda, but I do think that depending on how much progress council is able to make tonight, if you could tell us you want to include a rollback date, we will complete our research and come back to you with some analysis on that topic. Yeah, on the assumption that the ordinance that's in front of you tonight is not something that you could introduce, particularly if you wanted to add the appeals board, since we haven't given you any text for that.
Okay. So that's, I think, the first point I would like to go for is, do we want a rollback date? I do.
Could I ask before, I think the biggest issue are the numbers. Can we agree on a cap or can we not? What, if we can't, there's no need to talk about anything else. I think that's going to make or break this thing. So I would recommend that we kind of start there.
Yeah, I mean, with due respect, Councilman Carroll, that's my thought too, is that the rollback is important, but it's predicated, the cap, I think. So I came into this meeting not knowing where we stand on the details. And so this is one of the first details. And, we have it sitting in front of us, that the fork in the road here is the 2/3 CPI or 5%, whichever is lower, or 5% plus CPI or 7%, which is effectively the second option is taking AB 1482 and just chopping the cap down to 7%. And I'm sorry, 10%.
Instead of 10.
Instead of 10, yeah, 7, 10. And my thought there is that's not really a great anti-displacement number, but it is a good shock absorber. I mean, that's one of the lessons, like when people say give 1482 a chance, we gave it a chance. And COVID, other things may come up. I think 10% is too high. And I've really talked to stakeholders and I don't see a lot of strong pushback. So I'm willing to play with that number more, but in the interest, as Councilmember Haroff saying, let's not, diddle around too long. I think that number I'm comfortable with.
I did not use the word diddle.
Okay, it's my word, but anyway, so anyway, I'm just trying to frame that I think this is maybe a really good starting point, and I think the public's really interested in this as well. So I've said my piece. I've said it a number of times. I'm happy to debate it, deliberate it, discuss it further.
Okay. I would propose that we go with the staff recommendation of 2/3 of CPI or 5% or lower.
Okay.
And do you want to hear my arguments about it, or do you want to just?
Yes, I mean, we heard a lot of public comment and
Okay,
your comment's pretty important to me.
I hear so much. I find it very ironic. A lot of the arguments in favor of stronger protections for the tenants actually come from the landlords. They're the ones who have told us that their rent increases prior to 1482 averaged 2% a year or less. And but 1482, which was heavily lobbied by the California Apartment Owners Association and the realtors, was they jacked that number up to 10%. And that was the starting gun for what they call, I assume, unethical landlords. All of the ones that have told us 1 or 2% before 1482 are the ones who are telling us how ethical they are as landlords, which nobody up here, none of our staff, none of the tenants have said landlords have been unethical. It was the landlords who said they're ethical, meaning someone is unethical. They're calling it out. So the numbers are important of where we establish it. And going at the 2/3 of CPI or 5% or lower is in reality what the good landlords have been doing all along. So I don't think it's unreasonable to start with that number, especially if we give a provision to allow a larger rate increase if needed. I'll leave it there.
Which we would do. Which we would do.
Okay.
And for what it's worth, Mr. Mayor, I'd endorse what Kevin number 2 has just proposed.
Okay. And number 2. So I mean, I think this is one of the sticking points, and I think I spent more than enough time in the beginning, saying where I think some of the unintended consequences come. and the, you know, the 2% number and the 3% number, I believe that, you know, one of the results is that, you know, after COVID and after, you know, the inflation spike we had, that things will regress to a lower number. And I just want some insurance. And again, I also believe that if we, you know, I mentioned that, you know, for me, the starting point is we need to improve 1482. And I think that if we keep it as a city ordinance and, you know, we've talked about having a registrar looking at what's going on, I think we can decide. But the one unintended consequence, which has not been effectively, you know, debated for me or convincing to me, is that we won't lose inventory. And, you know, I think we've heard it anecdotally. I think I've seen it, you know, in statistically. I think the number range is a bit of a is up for grabs. But if we lost 100 units, that's significant, and that's, you know, only 5% of, you know, or less than 5% of controllable units. So that's my justification. And, you know, we've talked offline, you know, and I feel that, you know, that to me, that's just, with all the balancing acts going on, to me, that's a number that I would start with, knowing that we can still go to the voters for a tighter number. If the community thinks we're wrong in that consensus, I don't think it's a disservice. I just disagree with everybody who said, like, you know, it's up to us and we're not good stewards. I think we're very good stewards. Find me another city that's been talking about this so long. And I think everyone's kind of watching what Larkspur is doing, because we go on and on about rent control. I think we're really, you know, in uncharted territory. And, you know, maybe the philosophical divide is that, you know, do we err on the side of, you know, reducing displacement, or do we err on the side of not losing, you know, stock and housing? And I'm a little bit more on that side, and, you know, still open to more discussion. But I'm going to say that I'm, you know, the 5 plus CPI 7 is sort of, you know, the number that I'm comfortable with. You know, I guess we could talk more, but that's where I'd fill in the blank.
Again, the quote unquote reasonable landlords have told us 1 or 2%. I don't know where this 5% or 7% number is coming from. Making it a percentage of CPI does draw in the numbers they did present about the increase of their cost for water, insurance, and all the rest of that. Those are figured into the CPI on an annual basis. Next year's, or whenever it's calculated by the Department or Bureau of Labor Statistics, usually puts it together. Whatever the lag time is now, I haven't been following it as closely as I used to. That's the water increase, the insurance increase, the cost of supplies, et cetera. Those are all part of the CPI. So I think the 7% number is unreasonable, and it's the same. We're going to get into the same situation that we had with 1482. When you set a 10% rate, there's going to be a percentage of landlords, call them unethical. They call them unethical, not us, who are going to go for the maximum. Period. They're just going to do it. Why? Why should they be guaranteed 10% or 7% if it's not an actual cost?
Yeah, I mean, if anybody else wants to chime in, I don't just want to.
So
I'll chime in. I agree.
All right, and I'll chime in. I disagree. So I will say, Mr. Mayor, I think you're right on. And I think that we're not going to raise it 10% because the market does not support a 10% raise every year. And that's why it has never been 10% every year. The reason it's 1 to 2% per year is because that's what the market will support. Landlords are not, you know, going to keep it low. You know, that's how housing prices are determined. Now, the thing that I think is being missed here is that, yes, there's a CPI component, but everything doesn't rise exactly the same level of CPI. You may have, you know, certain materials rise more one year. You may have housing rises more one year, less another year. So giving a cap is just allowing people, it doesn't mean they're going to raise it. Landlords have not raised it 10% since it's been 10%. Some landlords may have. Oh, hold on. We're not, this is, public hearing is closed. Okay. And the only landlords that may have raised it 10% is if the rents were so unbelievably below market in the first place, the market would support a 10% raise. Okay. That's the only landlord that could possibly raise it 10%. Okay. So what we're talking about here, okay, is there's a free market, and we're talking about the state has put a cap on the free market. And we are saying, hey, do we want to put an additional cap on the free market, make it more restrictive to protect tenants more than the state law already protects tenants? And the question is how much, if we do want to do that, how much do we want to do that? You know, but I agree that there is a spectrum, and the more that you put that cap on, the more it's going to affect the supply of housing, which is going to, in turn, just the basic laws of supply and demand, it's got to raise prices. So the more that you lower that, the cap, the more housing prices are going to go up for the unregulated houses. And the question is, where do we find that balance? And I understand, Councilmember, you're on one end, and I completely respect that. And there were a couple of people that spoke that I agree. It's the argument is you have a moral obligation to help people, and I hear that and I feel that. Okay, there is part of me that's like, yeah, we do have a moral obligation to help people stay in their homes, but we also have to weigh the consequence of our actions and what effect that is going to have on the city. And that's the balancing act. And I get you're on one side, and I get, you know, Councilmember Way may be on the other side. I get Gabe, I look at as kind of in the middle, you know, and I don't think we're getting a 60% CPI passed on this board. So the question is, do you and do Councilmember Haroff, are you willing to come someplace closer to where Gabe is? And if you're not, then let's just say we can't, and we'll just put it on the ballot, let the people decide. And we don't have to waste the next 2 hours, because that's the question that is before us tonight.
I think you're articulating what the complex problem is or difficulty is in this situation, which is it's hard for all 5 of us who have been struggling with this and thinking about it and debating it and talking about it to come up with a resolution, which sort of points to why I think it needs a broader context in which people can discuss and vote on it.
But I agree
If you're going to put forward the 5% plus CPI or 7% cap, then you have that as an option to put forward.
So, Mr. Mayor, can I make a suggestion here? Sure. I think Councilmember Carroll had made a proposal, which is to adopt the 2/3 of CPI or 5%, whichever is lower. I would encourage the council, your direction, Mr. Mayor, to accept that as a motion. And let's vote on it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to understand in the context of many empty blanks, like we were going to start with the, you know, how the rollback goes. So if it's, the motion is to take the incomplete ordinance and kind of straw poll by straw poll, or, you know, call the question to that, take a vote, then I'm assuming procedurally that's one way to go. So if I understand, let me say it more simply. So right now we've got a lot of blanks in what started as the Oxnard, you know, kind of template. So we would say whatever follows, let the motion be 2/3 of CPR, 5%, whichever is lower, and vote on that component. I don't know if that makes sense. And council, I'm not sure if that could be another, but let's just keep it, you know, that would keep it simple.
There's an infinite number of numbers. So I think we need to start somewhere.
Get some feedback as to just procedure here, because I understand the intention. Sure.
Just, I do want to clarify, as I mentioned before, and this is, I think you all understand this, but I just want to make sure that it's clear for everyone who's observing as well. The ordinance that is in front of you tonight is not in a position to be moved and acted upon tonight. So just So there are too many, they're not just the specific numbers of the blanks, but there are other issues with it that it's not in a position to be introduced tonight.
Okay.
If you want to take each of these, if you want to essentially call the question on each of these blanks one by one, then I think it's fine for somebody to make a motion to say, for example, well, I move that we fill in that blank with 2/3 of CPI, but no greater than 5%. I think that's whichever is lower. That's a motion that could be made specifically to fill in that blank. You can have a vote on it. It's essentially, I mean, there's no final action on the ordinance. It's just an action on that blank. It's whether or not you want to do it by motion or straw poll, up to you. But to me, that's procedurally what I think Councilmember Haroff is proposing as a means of essentially bringing the discussion about this to some resolution to see whether or not there's a majority of the council, either for the 2/3 of CPI or 5%, whichever is lower, or CPI plus 5% or no greater than 7%. And you could just call each of those in order and see if there's a majority for each of them, and then consider that issue resolved, and we move on to the next one.
And just for clarification, I think that's exactly what I had in mind, Mr. Mayor. But I think it's helpful to have that discussion within the context of a proposal for an ordinance that we have in front of us, recognizing that as we go through the steps of making decisions about individual components, those will have to be translated into something that could actually be voted on as an ordinance at a later date. We're not doing that tonight. But the context is important because that defines where the gaps are. And I think we've identified the first and most important gap, which is the cap. And I think we have a suggestion that we move forward with a decision by this council on whether to accept what Councilmember Carroll has proposed to fill that gap.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful and that is clear. It's clear to everybody, right? And to the public, I hope as well. So the procedural distinction, and that is very critical, is we're not trying to vote up, down on an ordinance. We're trying to essentially look at line items as line items, and then they get assembled, with whatever the outcome is, and we'll see if we can even move forward. And then that's the real vote. And that's kind of what we've, many of us up here wanted to do, is to, have a deliverable to the city. That would be a city ordinance, hopefully with consensus, or we'll need 3 out of 5 on the final product. Okay, so that being said, I guess if you want to call that question, or however we want to phrase it, if it's a motion to say the ordinance should include 2/3 CPI, 5%, whichever is lower, why don't you can move that and second it, and we'll get a roll call.
I'll move it.
Okay, Allison.
Yes.
Councilmember Haroff,
Yes.
Councilmember Way,
No.
Vice Mayor Kendall,
No.
Mayor Paulson.
No.
I'll move that I'm sorry, 2/3 of CPI or 7% or lower.
Okay. I don't know if we're going to do serial motions, but we have that. Do we have a second?
If that's a formal motion, then I'll be happy to second it.
Allison?
Councilmember Carroll,
Yes.
Councilmember Haroff,
Yes.
Councilmember Way,
No.
Vice Mayor Kendall,
No.
Mayor Paulson.
No.
So put yours forward.
Okay, so I then move the other bullet point, 5% plus CPI or 7%, whichever is lower. And looking for a second. Yeah, so my motion, we've had 2 so far, and my third motion here would be 5% plus CPI or 7%, whichever is lower.
I'll second it.
Okay, Allison, roll call. Maybe go out of order, give them some time. I know that feeling. I hate that feeling. And if you need more time, I'm willing to, have a little discussion, because this is really important. I mean, I said I want an ordinance, and I came in, I've really tried to explain my thinking to the public. I understand the trade-offs and how many people might be unhappy with this. So either
We do have a motion.
true,
on the table.
then I'm going to withdraw my motion.
I'll with you in a second.
Yeah, it just, we'll get to it in less than 5 minutes, but I feel this is the meat. And, I want to make sure Councilmember Carroll has his time to think, and if he wants to talk some more.
I'd just like to hear your justification for it.
It's a good question. And, I tried to provide that earlier, but it's worth going over again. I mean, I think that my takeaway from everything, that I've heard tonight and before and the papers and so forth is that there is a trade-off between this very discussion, where we put in caps and base in caps and, including CPI, and what would happen first to the inventory, which I penciled out. Earlier I was thinking 5% might be lost if we go to the proposal you made, and that's too much for me. I don't know this, but I don't think any of us have the perfect information. That's my working assumption. And the other is I'm a little concerned about the use it or lose it. So I believe that if landlords, have the ability to work, with a range, they won't necessarily feel like if it's 2/3 of CPI, it's going to go up that amount every year, or 5%, even when you were going with the higher numbers. And that would happen if we have higher inflation, which may happen again. But I do believe they feel more at liberty and, with less need to go to the appeals board, and with what other the smaller landlords were bringing up, which again is over 50% of our, our housing providers. So I think that it gives them some room, and I look at the trends. We're not San Francisco. I look at the ownership base. I know we've had problems with prime, and they've addressed it in their own way. I do think that it would regress to 2 or 3% anyway. And what I really, really want for the public is that there's a shock absorber of 7%, that it would not go to 10% again. And what I really, really would encourage is, even if, as we get through this exercise, that we can think about putting this on the ballot. And I think both the Kevins, I think I understand that reasoning too, but that's also going to come with, we haven't discussed about downstream from that, is you need an awful lot of, additions to the just cause to ensure that, people who may feel that squeeze aren't going to work around it, which has happened in many of the municipalities that I've read about. So I think it's a good starting point. And, I've also said, to me, by doing this as a city, we can revisit it. I think we will have more data. So that's much of my justification. If
I don't accept that. And the reason is because what we're talking about, especially over the next 7 years, is a large percentage of our renter population that is currently over 65 and will be becoming over 65 in the next 7 years. Their income is going to be limited by Social Security and the percentage increase that's determined by the CPI. In addition to just their rent, their drugs are going to go up. I assume a lot of tenants like me pay their own water bills, so my water bill is going up 20%. In fact, I think that was an issue at Skylark, was that the old landlord used to pay the utilities, and now the individual units have to. My insurance is going to go up. And so handing the landlord the full CPI increase that I get on Social Security kills me. That's why senior citizens are not taking their full medications. Now they can't afford it. We could go down the whole list of, why they can't keep the heat up in their house, and, all the other issues they're facing. The rent burden is going to be, it's already high for a large percent of our population, not just seniors. But the seniors that I'm concerned about can't go out and work 2 or 3 extra jobs or do side hustles on the weekend. Social Security is going to be it for them. And I just don't see a 7%, any number plus a percentage, addressing their needs adequately. And I think you'll be forcing them out of the community. And again, going back to my original contention is that I think we should be as protective as possible of our renters to start, because they don't have the resources to endure a mistake on our part. If we set this number too high, they're going to get it in a piece of paper in their rent statement at the beginning of some month in the future and have to make that horrible decision of whether to stay or go. They don't have time to fight. They don't have the resources to fight that our landlords do. Our landlords can last 3, 6 months, whatever, if we make a mistake, and that gives us more than enough time to rectify it. If we erred in some way that hurts landlords, they can come to us with facts and figures and documents to show. But the tenants will have to go into scramble mode of how do they move, where do they move, how do they come up with that first, last security deposit, all the rest of it, and how far away are they going to have to move. So that's my problem with those numbers of adding 5% plus the percentage of CPI. I think it's got to be something more manageable that the landlords have consistently proven to us in the past. They can live with 1-2%. And making it a percentage of CPI protects both the tenant and the landlords if it goes higher. And we can always increase that number if a very unusual situation occurs, like what we're facing right now with the debt ceiling in Washington, D.C. We don't know what's going to happen at the end of this month. You know, our economy could come crashing down because of a bunch of right-wing nuts who would rather see the world burn, and a former president who's made it very clear he'd rather see the world burn. If he can't run it, he'd rather burn it down. And so I think we need the flexibility of being able to make the changes, and tenants don't have that flexibility. Landlords have much greater resources to endure our mistakes.
Yeah, and I'm sorry.
So again,
Councilman Carroll.
we have a motion on the table, and
Well, we withdrew the motion. I'd like to,
All right.
continue this discussion because
know.
I think you made and I'm
it
happy
wasn't
to.
clear to me that it was formally withdrawn.
I made it. I formally withdrew it. So I think that was I want to pause because that is, very much why I'm sitting up here too. That's one of the compelling arguments. And, I'll go back to my opening where I said it's to me 2 issues, and these aren't rebuttals because I don't want to rebut what you said. I think protecting seniors, and I said I've run the numbers that Marin's going to be 1/3 over 60 in 2030, and Larkspur's closer to 50%. So I really feel that's an issue worth fighting for. My main thoughts to that are one is what numbers are we talking about? And we don't really know. But that's why I brought up the housing element. So the housing element formally addressed how many seniors we have and how many are rent burdened. And, then I tried to, look at it a couple of different angles. So the Skylark Fund, which did a form of means testing to, I think look at people who may not be able to make medications. I have to believe it was, people there who required it came to a number of 30 out of 450. Now, I'm not going to call those final numbers. I'm just going to say both you and I are concerned about this, and both you and I are making estimates. You know, you get a lot of things through your industry. I'm trying to run the numbers. So, you know, how do we deal with that? My dilemma is 55% of the people don't need this help right now. They don't need this help. It's not even rent burdened. And we're gonna, you know, go all the way and titrate and tighten and start incurring more general fund costs and everything, where I would prefer to take, you know, I believe it's $130,000 to support those 30 people at Skylark. I prefer to take that kind of money and do it direct. I'd rather use the scalpel than the hammer. And I believe that 2/3 CPI, 5% for me is more of a hammer. It will protect the city, but it'll protect people who don't necessarily need it. We can all admit if you're not rent burdened. Now, I'll qualify that. You may be rent burdened in a few years. So I do think that we have to be careful about the creep, you know, the creep in costs going up and the creep of people getting older. So that's why I'm sitting with a position for 2023. But in 2023, I would rather look at all ways, and I've, you know, tried to say this many times in public, my favorite tool in the toolbox is affordable housing. The problem, and you know, Councilmember Harif and I worked on that a whole lot. The problem is it's going to take too long and we're going to bleed, you know, we're going to bleed out our seniors. The next one is, I think, where Councilmember Candel was going, what if we took some money and targeted directly? There's some problems, like the county does this and they bleed big time. Can we pass that tax? So I don't know that that's going to help. Then the next one is, do we apply a tourniquet and just stop this bleeding? And I'm assuming you're going to get gangrene too, because there's not just the, you know, 30 people at Skylark, or my numbers are about 250 that you're talking about. And I'd love to debate if that's accurate or not, but we're talking about 250 and units, I'm sorry, not people. So it's more people, but you know, isn't there a more targeted way to assist them? That's part of the reason why I'm wanting to get a framework in place. And if your moral argument really is that strong and the voter believes it, I'd really like them to weigh in to say, we're going to take general fund money, we're going to take staff time, we're going to take some, we are going to lose inventory. It may only be 1 or 2%. I think it's 5 to 10. I want the community to say, these are the prices we're willing to pay, because my heart goes out to that, but I also am up here saying, what are we doing for the whole community? And I'm trying to justify where, you know, my numbers are, you know, on that basis. So anyway, that was a bit long-winded. Please. Yeah.
So where are we? I go back to the fact.
We're debating, Kevin.
Yeah.
Kevin.
We're having a robust discussion. Is that better? I think so. Going to means tested financial help is just way out of Larkspur's reach. I'm sorry. I just, I have 2 children that are in subsidized housing, essentially, different programs, and it's a mess. And it's expensive. It's intrusive. And it's just impractical and unworkable for a small city like ours, which is why I can't even contemplate going there, quite frankly. Why we need, yeah, I would like to be surgical, but the reality is we're here because if you set these limits high, you are going to have a percentage of the landlords that are going to go to the max. We can't surgically separate any one individual landlord out of the equation. And so we have to establish rules to protect our citizens from those people. It's happened in our community. We have at least 2 landlords I'm aware of that have gone to the max amounts with no justification. They haven't had to prove why they need 10% when all the other landlords tell us they've been able to live with 1 or 2%. Those are facts. You're talking about, you're trying to predict the future based on all these studies of bigger cities and markets. The facts are, in Larkspur, 90-some% of our landlords don't need 10%. they've managed to do just fine on 2% all these years. And whether we're in a one-time bump in the road or not, we don't know. And the facts are that if we keep this at a council level, we can react when we know the fact, when we see what is actually happening to both our landlords and to our tenants. And unfortunately, the cheapest way for us to do that is by being the meat act approach. We have, it's, we wouldn't need laws about murder if it wasn't for the fact there's a percentage of the population that commit murders. Very regrettable, but that's the reality of why we have a law against murdering people, is because there's a percentage that are going to do it. And we're faced with the same analogous thing with rental. If you say you're going to allow a higher cap like that, there are landlords that are going to take advantage of it. And so why should then it becomes for the tenant a luck of the draw, that their landlord doesn't do that, doesn't maximize their profits for their shareholders or their family or whatever. And so you punish the good with the bad. And that's the only way for us to address it, I think, is to set the lower limit to start with, and we can always adjust it upwards. And if any landlord comes to me and shows me they're being hurt by it, I'll be the first one to endorse granting them the exception. I'm a small businessman too. I understand margin, and I understand I could charge $2 more a mile for my services. I have customers who would be more than happy to pay for it, and probably what I would lose in business now. It's amazing to me how many calls I get between 5 and 7 a.m. in the morning now from people who can't get an Uber or Lyft. They get accepted and then rejected 5 or 6 times, and then they call me, and they'll pay anything at that point to get to the airport on time. So I could be charging them a lot more, but I haven't raised my rates over that or taken advantage of them, because that's me. If I was a corporation, I'd be saying, oh, wait a minute, I should jump it up 20% if you call me at the last minute, but I don't do that. And most people don't. But the point I'm trying to make is, we know where the real harm is to tenants. We've heard from the landlords what they've needed in the past, and I think we start from there rather than the other way around. If the facts prove us wrong, we can change it and make adjustments. But every time, in the meantime, we risk hurting real human beings, not numbers on a spreadsheet. These are real human beings with children and grandchildren, with all the messiness of being human beings, that would be faced with the major crisis of being forced out of homes they've lived in for 10, 20 years. And you can't take that back. You can't go heal it. And they don't have the resources to react. And so I'm starting to repeat myself, so I'll stop.
Thank you. And I'll just answer quickly, but I don't want to, again, I'd like the other council members and I know Councilmember Haroff has got the finger on the trigger for a motion, so I want to respect, moving the process. But I think in what you were saying, so you said, studies and that are pretty much in the abstract, or I'm looking at spreadsheets, not people. I think that you had said probably correctly that there have been 2, we'll call them bad actors. I don't want to create narratives either, but we know that there were a lot of problems with Prime. A lot of Prime people are here. They've been calling in, and I've talked to the Prime management. I've talked to the Skylark Tenant Association. So that's one. But I'm curious if you can just say what the second one is, where you think there's been. You said there were kind of 2, because I was going to focus on Prime, but maybe I'm missing something.
Well, number one, we don't know.
Okay, good.
And that's the whole point of the rental registry, is so that we will know what our landlords are doing. And I base our decisions on facts, not conjecture.
Yeah, well, I'm all for that. And I think you're right. I mean, it's kind of, do we start, with the looser or do you start with the tighter and loosen? So, back to, what I was saying, I mean, I think a lot of Councilmember Way and Candel's, their subcommittee, I thought we would generalize subsidy, and it really went to prime. And my read of, are we protecting people? For whatever reasons, my read is that prime has created a fund and people have voted with their feet, and they have moved into this option where 125 to 135, the numbers changed a few times, but roughly a third, less than a third, roughly 30% of tenants there are receiving, especially the ones better than what we were proposing, the 2/3 CPR, 5%. So if you're getting a 15% discount, you're getting a better deal than what we could offer, and that protection. And I also, think I take their letter seriously from, the last meeting we had on the 8th, that they could not, it's not only pulling it, but they could, because the difference between prime and many of the other good actors is debt service. If you live in a house, that you've lived in forever, your mortgage is next to nothing. If you buy now, it's a $2 million thing and you've got huge mortgage payments. So I think it's credible to say that they could claim no profit and find a way to get 10% increases. So we end up, taking those 30 people, the remaining 100 people, and probably the rest of the people, and possibly, in the epicenter of this discussion, making things worse. And all in the spirit of what the ordinance we're going to pass now. So that's been one thing on my mind. It's I don't want to condition policy on an instance, but that is on my mind. And beyond that, one of my opening comments was, so we have them carrying roughly 450 out of 2,500 controllable units. I've gone to the other large operators. They've been in the community forever. I've asked around. I don't think I've just been looking at studies from San Francisco. I feel that, if I can do anecdotes like you're really good at them. But, I was at Stomp, there was someone who up in Madrone Canyon, someone offered him 1,400 for a 1-bedroom. I am quite convinced, and the point that I'd love you to address is that, yes, I want to be there protecting you, and you're going to do it with the sledgehammer, with the scalpel. I don't think we've addressed what the loss of inventory means as far as harm. So that person who is an incredibly valued member of the community found 1,400 for a 1-bedroom in a prime location because there's a sense of laissez-faire freedom. And I'm afraid when you start regulating, you are actually encouraging people to say, uh-oh, watch out. And we got that testimonial. We had a workshop with, a number of, it was maybe only out of the 50 possible ownership units, it was only 5 or 10. I was a little disappointed we didn't get more. But from all the outreach I've done, people are saying, look, this is my 401k. Clearly, when you start capping the gross rental multiplier, the net operating incomes, the cap rates, they all take that investment. And so we're asking for a wealth transfer from 50 people with hundreds, over 50% of the units, to many people who don't deserve it, in the interest of trying to protect the 200 people that is on the back of my envelope as an estimate of the ones who aren't going to get medicine. And I really do still want to help one way or another. So that's, again, that's why I'm saying, I think the numbers will help us. I'm not coming up here with the answers, but I'm coming up here with staff couldn't give us better numbers. Studies are all controversial. I've been very public and disclosed where my assumptions are, and please challenge me if you think I'm wrong. But on that basis, I think that that we will start a shock absorber protection. We'll maintain where the greatest damage was in a state that I think is going to do the protection that you want. And then we can see if there are other instances from the registry or from whatever, if we need to tighten from there. And the biggest thing is, I don't think we lose that 10 to 15% inventory, which is a huge hit. That's a huge hit. People go condo, TIC, however they do it. I do think that Larkspur is going to have lower vacancy rate, and I think it will raise rates.
So put it forward here.
I would point out,
I'm not sure where that was all going, but is that leading to a recommendation or a proposal? Or
Well, I think that
well, I don't want to point out that we already know at one point in one of these many endless hearings, we found out Skylark had about a 20% vacancy rate at one point. whether it was because of the uh, renovations or the asbestos or whatever, but that's something we don't control. Landlords are going to do what's in their best economic interest. And I don't think the smaller landlords can afford that kind of vacancy rate or pulling things off the market because the way their loans or everything else that are structured. The point I'm trying to get is that for landlords, there are so many variables of how they handle their business. They have tax write-offs, they have favorable loan interest rates. They have so many tools in their toolbox if they're willing to use them. Some won't, some will. We can't control that either. Tenants have no control. And they have, again, the short leash. And I think that's why it's important to start with the lower numbers to protect them and adjust to protect our landlords as we go along. If a landlord chooses not to make a profit, that's their choice. But a tenant shouldn't have to be faced with losing their housing. And especially for tenants who've lived here 10, 20 years. To me, it is a question of people versus dollars. I'm going to go with the people. Because the dollars are always going to be there. The landlord is not going to lose that property. They'll have a sellable property. If it becomes unprofitable, I mean, I love it when I hear landlords telling us, oh, I own 30 units in San Francisco. Why? If it's so horrible to own that property in San Francisco, why are you still there? That makes no sense if it's that horrible. Get out of there. And buy more in Marin where there isn't rent control. I mean, there's obviously a profit even in a severely rent controlled city. But for tenants, there are no options other than you're here, or you can afford it, or you have to move out of the county, is what it comes down to.
Okay, so it's getting close to 9 o'clock. I'll let you have the last word there, Councilmember Carroll. Any other comments? And I'm willing to resubmit. I think I wanted to withdraw my motion because this conversation is important. I think it's at the heart of things. I know that I'm going to get some hate mail, but I really want to be clear, what I think is fair. And I want to add that I don't think that 2/3 CPI, 5% or whichever lower is wrong. I'm saying if you want to go further, my moral sense, my sense to the city, the general fund, to the population, to all the people I've heard from is let's put it on the ballot. So if we want an ordinance tonight, I'm going to resubmit my motion that it's 5% plus CPI, or I'm sorry, it's written there 5% plus CPI or 7%, whichever is lower. And again, this is a 2023 thing. It could be revisited. So with that, I made a motion. Unless anyone had anything else, I don't think so. Do we have a second?
Gotta get started somewhere.
Sure, I'll second it.
Okay. Roll call.
Councilmember Carroll,
Yes.
Councilmember Haroff,
No.
Councilmember Way,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kandel,
Yes.
Mayor Paulson.
Yes. Okay, 4-1. Okay, so sorry again. Again, we'll have an ordinance at the end, which we can vote up or down, but I think we needed to make some motion, and I want to reemphasize if, we can go with, once we have a city ordinance, we can still consider putting something on the ballot, which is far stricter, and really let it be worked out, with the electorate. So it is 9 o'clock, and I do think this might have been the lengthiest one.
Question for city attorney, perhaps. Hypothetically, if we were unable to come up with an ordinance and we wanted to do a temporary rent freeze, cap, however we want to call it, and we want to put it on the ballot. And we say, listen, I'm hearing what Councilman Vaccaro is saying, that there are people who between now and November might, be displaced because if rent goes up. And we wanted to say, okay, we're not going to raise rent until November, and we're going to put it on the ballot and then let the people decide, is that a legal possibility?
I know the number of cities have done temporary rent increase moratoriums. If it's something that council's interested in, we can come back at a future meeting with a little more analysis. We can even, if council wants, we can just draft something and tell you the risks associated with it. It may be another exercise similar to this with some blanks to be filled in, but it's something that I know has been done. I just don't know where the pitfalls are that we need to address as we sit here tonight.
And I don't want to single-handedly give you more work. So right now, it was just a question, and we'll see what council says.
Okay, yeah, and more to consider. So I'm proposing that we move to the next point, which was on the bottom of page 2 of our report here. At the May 8th meeting, some of the council members expressed a preference for an appeals board. I think that one, I'm not sure if we need to, maybe we can discuss it a little bit and try the same as before to make a motion, which again is not on the ordinance, but on the item, which, we'll have to vote on a final ordinance. So if anyone wants to start with that topic. And if maybe our memories can be jogged a little bit, there was kind of a fork in the road between a formal rent board and the appeals board, or the city using it with staff. Again, that might be nice to rehash what that was.
Well, it's been my supposition, looking at the record in Oxnard, that they started at a place that the Rent Stabilization Ad Hoc Committee started 8 months ago, which was, how do we localize the Tenant Protection Act? And I think that's the exercise Oxnard went through. Well, the Tenant Protection Act is missing a fair rate of return petition process. So I think what Oxnard said is, let's add one in, but we like the idea that if the landlord objects to the outcome, they have to go to court to resolve the matter. So that's what the ordinance we put in front of you is designed to do. The appeal of the city manager's decision, and by city manager, we mean whoever the city manager's retained to make that decision, goes to court. We added in a provision that if the tenant is the party that is still going to be subjected to exceeding the cap, that they could request mandatory mediation, because we've heard you talk about that at previous meetings. At your May 8 meeting, some of the council members indicated a preference for an appeals board. And what staff had suggested is, I personally think Fremont did a nice job by saying, if you have an appeals board, have 2 renters, 2 landlords, and then the 5th vote is somebody who is neither of those 2. And these are all residents of your community. So if you want to have an appeals board, our suggestion is to model it after Fremont.
Okay, great. Any questions about that?
So hypothetically, if this ordinance has 5% plus CPI at 7% cap, and a housing provider says they need to increase to 11%, which is above 1482.
Yeah, so you're really not doing that. You're creating a regulatory window of 3% or
3%.
whatever the number plays out to be. Yeah.
So they wouldn't be able to appeal higher than 7.
No, they can appeal
Up
to 10,
up to
but
10.
then they're hitting the state cap.
Right. Okay.
It's an oddity in the state law, frankly.
Yeah, 10% is.
Well, that there's no process to deal with the scenario you're talking about, where some significant cost is greater. I think the assumption was 10% was enough. So.
Do we know how many appeals the city of Fremont has had?
I don't. I'd have to pursue that. Generally,
Good.
anecdotally, most cities I interviewed, they, the lower the cap, the more appeals you get. And Fremont, as I recall, is not on the lower end, they're kind of in the middle. So I'm guessing they don't have as high a volume as cities with a lower cap. And then the other thing is, once these programs get established, I think we've talked about this before, a lot of the cities have now built the structure where there aren't actually a lot of appeals because they work things out before a formal appeal is necessary.
The thing that occurs to me is Fremont is over 200,000 people. And I'm just curious, if we did go with the appeals board of tenants, landlord, and neither, would that be a standing board or would it just be on an as needed basis?
And ad hoc.
Well, it doesn't have to meet unless there's a need for a meeting. So in that respect, it would be as needed, but you would appoint the board and they'd have terms.
Could the ordinance be worded in a way that the council is the appeals board?
Yes, you can.
But if we felt there was a volume, in other words, if we got a slew of appeals at once this went into effect, that we could then appoint a board to delegate this to?
You could do that as well.
Okay.
I think the two things to consider is if you want to take up council meetings with those types of appeals would be one question to talk about. The other thing that you've heard some of the public say is the composition of the council doesn't necessarily reflect the constituencies involved.
Right.
So.
Oh, no, I'm very aware of that.
So I think we need an appeals process. If we're going forward with this, I think that's the equitable way to have the property owners and the tenants have a choice to have one step above the city manager's solo decision making.
So I'll make a motion to fill in the blank with the appeals board.
And we can configure it with two, as you described, the two tenants and two housing providers and a neutral individual. I don't know what would be the best. But I feel like we have appeals now for decisions that are made by our planning commission, which deal with property rights. And it's a property rights decision ultimately. So I'll put that forward. Somebody can decide.
Okay, so we have a
if they like that idea.
motion for the appeals board as described, and I think it's, do we have a second?
But before that is mandatory mediation. Was a bullet point here. Or what do you think, Sky? You're wanting to say something.
Yeah.
I was to say, we had only included mandatory mediation because the review process that Oxnard had does not really have a place for tenants in it. It was basically the landlord. I mean, they would get notice and could submit information, but there wasn't a formal place for them because there wasn't really a hearing. It was just a determination by the city manager. If there's basically a review by the rent board at a public meeting, then the tenant has the opportunity to participate in the review board's determination and hearing. That's not to say that you couldn't also have a mandatory mediation process, but it's worth thinking about whether or not we had only suggested it because we had heard council say, we feel like there's not enough discussion happening between landlords and tenants in these situations. But so we could still have it, but it would be on top of a public hearing process.
Right. I don't think we have the bandwidth to require mandatory mediation, frankly. So, but I do think an appeal, if we're going to go this way, we haven't voted on that yet, but if we're going to go this way, I think we need to have options for property owners and for tenants to appeal a decision should they have greater evidence. So,
Okay, so is that a motion or?
yes, I guess I'll do
Okay,
that.
can you maybe just state the whole motion for us?
As we're crafting this rent stabilization ordinance, I would express an interest or preference for an appeals board for disputes regarding a rent increase. Should a property owner or a tenant ask for an appeal?
And I will withdraw my motion and second that motion.
Did you have one on the board? I didn't even
Not
notice.
anymore.
Okay.
Not sure that was being stated. I'm sorry, what was characterized as a motion was what you described was an expression of interest, and I just want to make clear
Okay,
that
it's
you're
my
making a
motion.
formal motion.
It is.
Okay, so is the motion cleared up?
Two property owners, two tenants, and a resident who is neither a landlord or a tenant. It's the staff report.
Okay. So is the motion clear to everybody? And we had a second. So Allison, could we get a roll call?
Councilmember Carroll, Yes. Councilmember Hara,
No.
Councilmember Way.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kendall.
Yes.
Mayor Paulson.
Yes. Okay, so 4-1. Okay, so then the next point is on page 3 in the middle there. At the May 8th meeting, there seemed to be consensus to exempt accessory dwelling units, ADUs. So I believe that would be the staff's asking for direction for us to definitively do what we're doing now and say that ADUs either will be exempted or not exempted. Is that how? Okay. So I don't know if we want to discuss that.
Or anything else.
Right,
Or
so
anything else.
Just, that was, we heard a lot about ADUs.
So question, what I heard from Sky was if we choose to, we could exempt up to three or fewer units. More than that, he would have to do legal research. I don't know what the will of the council is. I just wanted to clarify that with him earlier.
So the list here, the top of page 3 has 5 bullet points of exempt properties under the Tenant Protection Act. And I put forward that we maintain those exemptions and add accessory dwelling units.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Roll call, Allison.
And also under the Tenant Protection Act, in Costa Hawkins, it is date specific too for what's exempt.
Okay, so I think we had a motion and a second.
Councilmember Carroll,
Should I read those? Do we need to read those which are exempt?
I think what I heard the motion is to use what's in the Tenant Protection Act, but add ADUs to the list. Is that
Right.
correct?
Yeah, so the Tenant Protection Act has 5 different categories that are exempt from this.
So we'll just copy that right out of the state law into the ordinance and then we'll add ADUs. I assume by extension, you also mean the junior accessory dwelling.
Yes.
Just clarifying.
Okay, so the motion then to take AB 1482 exemptions and add ADUs. We had a motion, we had a second.
And JDUs.
And JADUs, yeah, juniors. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Carroll, Yes. Councilmember Hara,
Yes.
Councilmember Way.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kendall.
Yes.
Mayor Paulson.
Oh,
Yes.
gosh, I can't believe it.
Consensus. Okay, super. So then I'm turning to page 5 of the staff report at the very top. I'll just read out the sentence here. At the May 8th meeting, the council appeared to want to establish relocation assistance at either 3 months or 4 months of rent with some minimum amount also specified.
So for signposting purposes, you've transitioned from rent stabilization to eviction protections. So just want to make sure you.
Just a question, Mr. Mayor, that there is in one more bullet point. Who's paying the fee for this?
For which?
So on page 3. A rent stabilization program fee shall be paid annually by landlords to fund the rent stabilization program. We had some discussion that I think if I recall that we may bring this out of general fund.
I think realistically, the way this will end up working is that initially the general fund will need to pay for a year or two so that we can create a defensible fee. Then we'll probably amortize those earlier costs into the fee and recover them over time. I have struggled to figure out another way to really do that. I mean, the only other option is to put a nominal fee in place so you're partially offsetting your costs. But somehow the general fund's going to bear the burden for some period of time until the program's up and running. So, and then that burden typically in most cities shifts entirely to the landlord and they pay on a per unit basis to be registered and some cities have allowed a provision that the landlord can pass a percentage of that fee through to the rent.
Sorry, go ahead, Councilmember Way.
Yeah. I mean, we're already at 9:15 and it's been 4.5 hours, or 4 hours. We're not going to reach a conclusion tonight on this. So should we
Yeah,
schedule another meeting and work on eviction protections?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, so there's not confusion. I don't think there's another way to regulate this program without the registry. So it's really just a question of whether there's a fee attached to filing the data. But the data have to be filed or you can't really regulate this program.
Do we put a penalty in? Does some ordinances have penalties if we had one property owner say they didn't want to register it. They didn't want their information to be public.
They would then be operating unlawfully in the city at that point. And we would have to pursue it as we would any other failure to comply.
And I had a question also. I think we were talking about the cost of the program, and it was hard to have the cost without specifics. And I'm wondering if the specifics provided so far, like the cap, if that would be something where we can estimate like what the upfront fee, how that might, affect general funds, what that might be.
I'm gonna stick with I think it's probably $100,000 to $200,000, but yeah, I gave you a breakdown I can pull the memo back up. I mean, a lot of it'll depend on the ultimate choices made. So then you just do the math. There's 1,800 to 2,000 units roughly that are affected. So you're spreading that cost across all those units.
And the 100, 200 is like an upfront, like a startup fee. and then
No, I
each-
think I'm sorry, I like to pull the memo up. I think there's some first time startup costs that I talk about in the memo. That's more your annual cost.
Okay, so average that is about 150 annually, but additional funds, and the thought was to use the general fund for some portion of that, or that wasn't clear to me.
I've talked with some of the other cities. What a lot of them have done is fronted this cost in the general fund and then amortized the recovery of those costs over so many years afterward. So that's a nominal piece of the future year fees. That is a common practice when you're starting a new fee, is to absorb the cost initially so you can create a proper defensible fee. Because remember, we're required by law to charge a fee that's equal to our costs. We're not supposed to charge more than our costs. So the problem here is costs are relatively unknown in the first couple of years.
Okay.
You're saying 100 to 200,000 and how spread over how many units?
My figures are it's about 1,800 to 2,000 units because you have to account for there's quite a few units in Larkspur that are not going to be subject to this either because of the year they were built or because they're designated affordable for under various government programs.
Okay, so 1,800. So we're looking roughly $55 a unit to cover the 100,000.
If we end up running it on that end, then yes.
So would a $50
plus an
initial
startup
would a
cost.
$50 initial fee per unit
Probably based
be
just
defensible?
on, well, maybe, I wouldn't be too caught up on the general fund absorbing the first year costs and recovering it back. I mean, we've done that in other fee programs, so I don't think I would single this one out as different from other programs that
You don't want to give Sky sweaty palms. Okay, no, all right. Thank you.
And to Councilmember Way's point, should we kind of take a break? I'm looking at, we're I think the most difficult and time consuming was the first page or two. And I think we only have 2 or 3 more of these to go and they've been going fast. So I'd love to at least get through this exercise. And, I'm sure there will be, public input later and others. Again, we're really trying to make some progress and turn this into something that's very specific and then we can debate the specifics. So I'll go back then to page 4 where we were, or page 5 actually, if that's okay. And that was saying at the May 8th meeting, the council appeared to want to establish relocation assistance at either 3 months or 4 months of rent with some minimum amount also being specified. So maybe we can kind of clarify that and turn that into a motion.
3 months and $5,000.
What's the current law?
The current law is 1
1
month and sorry.
Yeah, current law is 1 month. One of your speakers mentioned Petaluma, they did 2.5 months or $9,000. I mean, again, these numbers are whatever you want them to be. So.
Yeah, and I'll just say quickly, I mean, I'm a fan of as much protection as possible because I do think this is, where, to Councilmember Carroll's point, if there were like the dislocation, I want to minimize any damage. So, just getting a moving ban is kind of, 1 month of sub-market rent is hard. So I'd say 3 at a minimum. And I'm actually kind of push for 4 if that's possible.
Well, the staff recommended 2 months. Or 5,000, whichever is greater.
I think that came from the Concord template. I'm not sure.
It's a very common number. I think I've seen at least 10 or so recent adoptions of eviction protections, but I've seen different numbers. Like I said, Petaluma just passed. I think it acts as 250% of 1 month rent. It's 2.5 months. So staff recommended it because it just had been out there a lot.
I'll make a motion for 3 months and $5,000.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, roll call, please.
Yes.
Councilmember Hara,
Yes.
Councilmember Way,
No.
Vice Mayor Kendall.
Yes.
Mayor Paulson.
Yes. Okay, the next point is at the May 8th meeting, there appeared to be consensus for establishing right of return, but council did not find an agreement on time period. Okay, so there again, I think just maybe a few definitions, because to me, this is a meatier one as well. I think one thing the definition of substantial remodel may or may not bear on this in particular point. So I'm wondering if staff can just, remind us of the discussion and kind of where we were with that.
And I'm sorry if I could ask staff also, did we determine the price at which they could return if there was kind of an upgrade to the unit?
So on the first point, this discussion has to do with if somebody has been evicted for a no fault reason. Does the council want to establish a time period during which if the landlord decides that the no fault reason is no longer in existence and they want to rent the unit again, is there a period where they have to first offer it to the person who was subject to or the tenants that were subject to the eviction? And these time limits are kind of all over the place, like a lot of these things in these ordinances. I've seen 1 year a lot, but I acknowledge that's probably on the more moderate side of things. You've had some advocates asking you to go as much as 5 years or longer. And there are some ordinances that go that long. A secondary question we haven't got into is that we may have to before you get to the finish line. It's up to you. Some of the ordinances stop there and they just say, tenant, do you want to come back? Almost everyone I've seen, Vice Mayor Kendall says, doesn't talk to this point of anything other than the rent rate that was being charged before the person was evicted. There's also some ordinances that get into paying penalties if you want to put it back on the market. sometimes you'll hear people refer to it as damages because the tenant feels they've been injured by being evicted under false premise pretenses, and you may want to discuss that. It's up to you.
So, I'm sorry, just a quick question so I understand. So a landlord hypothetically has to upgrade a unit either for legal requirements or because they want to, they dump a bunch of money into this. So now it's a better unit than it was. Most of the ordinances say that the old tenant has a right to move back in at the same price they were paying before the upgrade. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know.
Just telling you what a lot of us say.
I mean, I don't know how that's fair to the property owner. I mean, let's say they have to, a tenant has to leave a unit because they have to rebuild the deck and the external part of the structure. Like we've heard that has to happen at many of the Bon Air apartment complexes. They have to rebuild the deck, costs $250,000. I just don't know how you can then have a tenant return for the maybe below market price that they had before. I just don't know how that's fair.
Wouldn't the landlord have a right to appeal that?
They could, I guess.
The exact situation that Catherine's bringing up.
Well, so then the landlord can, could appeal to raise the rent, but they'll be limited to whatever the rent stabilization ordinance says in terms of the amount they can pursue.
So I have a thought. I actually read ahead to the next one, which is even more, there's a lot of stuff and I think more discussion.
So I was going to jump in because I think you're going to the substantial remodel question. That's been in the press a lot lately. I will acknowledge that if you haven't had a chance, we can collect some recent writings about that. That's a whole conversation unto itself about that particular element of the no fault list.
Yeah.
I think it's distinguished from, and the Tenant Protection Act does this from complying with the health and safety regulation, right? So a lot of, for example, the balcony is that we've heard some landlords talk about is a compliance with a government regulation. It's distinct from just saying I want to remodel the
just
unit.
voluntarily wanting to remodel a unit.
Yeah, so there's a very controversial project right now about sprinklers and whether that's a government regulation or a part of just doing a substantial remodel.
Yeah, I would definitely appreciate that clarification. Then I'm looking at, the right of return question and its time, period, the definition of substantial remodel, and then a very broad category of the just cause. Again, you gave us a great signpost. We've gone into an entirely, most of our models have, two ordinances, one rent, cap stabilization and just cause. And, we're at 4 hours now and, we know we have to meet again. I'd actually like, because we've actually given the public some specifics, there will probably be more feedback, inquiry, I think we're really, so my thoughts, if the council's okay, is that we kind of adjourn for tonight and then get some more of that data and really know that we have to read the bottom of page 5 and page 6 to finish this up. And then I'm just curious if staff feels we gave enough guidance for tonight, or if it matters if we, postpone that. I personally, am thinking of how long it took us to get through the first point and can see equal amount of time, if not longer here.
Well, I think we have enough direction to fill in most, if not all, the blanks on the rent stabilization ordinance so that you could have another public hearing where you might take up that vote on that ordinance. I think you're going to still need to work on eviction protections if you choose to. And I should note, since we mentioned Petaluma a couple times, I was skimming because I wasn't familiar with where they were in their debate. It looks like they only passed eviction protections, not rent stabilization. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are some communities having that discussion, regardless of how you resolve your debate on rent stabilization.
So as a matter of process, we're kind of building two ordinances here, so we could have two separate votes with 4 combinations of what the outcome is.
Yeah, I gave you the example. Bell Gardens just chose to have one ordinance, but most communities treat these two topics as separate but discussed simultaneously.
Okay, any thoughts, council? I, think at 4 hours, it might be good to come with a fresh mind and, really finish this up and, maybe we'll have the final information and take a final vote.
And I was just going to suggest, Mayor, that we could follow the process that we used for the Magnolia Village appeal hearing and sort of continue this item, pick up deliberations where you left off tonight on the tenant protection pieces, and then take public comment after you've had a chance to deliberate. If I just want to remind you of that option, just so that you are aware of it when you figure out how you want to proceed.
Okay, appreciate it.
Could I ask, not that I don't want to hear public comment, because I don't want that to be misunderstood, but we've had a lot of public comment. This isn't going to come out right, a way to limit it so that,
I think you,
because I think this has been very decisive in what we're doing.
I think what Mr. Woodruff was saying is you could schedule a continuation of this hearing and resume this conversation where you are, and then take public
Should there be
comment when
needed.
you've concluded your deliberations. So you could basically say, we're hitting pause because it's late tonight. And then we're going to come right back where we were, but you will then take public comment on the
Okay.
result of your deliberations.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I just want to, state that from my perspective, the public comment has been absolutely important, and I'd like to get more next time. And in between, I'm assuming people will write in and have some thoughts. So I perhaps City Attorney, you can help me here. I think in the formalities, I should have said we've opened the public hearing, we've closed the public hearing. I think I didn't do that with public comment. So can I now say we closed public comment, even though it was about an hour ago? And with saying we close this public hearing, we can take a motion for adjournment.
And I don't know that, do you have a date, or we're gonna need to do a date uncertain? Because I know you have items coming up for regular meetings.
All 5 of you are going to be present.
So what I'd suggest is that you continue this hearing to a date uncertain. We will do the same notice for when it's continued. But we will also note that when the hearing resumes, council will pick up deliberations at this point and continue your discussions on the remaining items, and then take public comment after your deliberations. But there will be public comment as part of the continuation of the hearing.
Okay, so I'm about to repeat what Sky said. Any thoughts, council? Okay, so
I second it.
Well, okay, well, let's see if I have any short-term memory left. So we will continue this public hearing. And we have an uncertain date, but last time it was 2 weeks. I'm assuming it'll be something in that time frame. We don't know. And the format of the continuation will be to return to page 5 of the current staff report and discuss the 3 items that were remaining. And at the conclusion of that, go to public comment. And then we'll just see where that leads us in that public hearing. So with that being said, I guess, do I need a motion, or I just stated it? Okay.
We just,
Parliamentary is, yeah.
sorry, reiterate the sort of the things you're going to follow up for. So it was, what were your questions? That was.
On the legal side, we're going to complete our research on the rollback date question.
That was it.
And on where we can defensively draw lines. You've already talked about the number of units question, but you can revisit it as part of the continued hearing. It's not a foregone issue, but we'll complete our research on that as well.
To help staff, I don't think there was consensus that we were interested in going more than a minimum of 3 units. I don't think staff needs to do that research unless I'm misreading council.
I was just, it was on my list in case you wanted to know the answer.
Okay.
Okay, so with that, the public hearing is closed, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Second. All right, I don't think we need a roll call. Thank you guys, everybody who's still in the audience. I see so many people. It takes 4 hours to run a marathon if you're kind of slow, and it's 4 hours. Thanks everybody for hanging out, and I really hope we can constructively keep moving this process forward. So good night, and we'll see you soon.